Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. It was a Saturday. The Saturday that everything changed. I'm David, and I was 11 years old. We lived in Stockton. But that weekend we were staying at my stepdad's friend's cabin near Camp Connell, way up in Calaveras County, 3 miles above Big Trees. That's what they kept saying. It was supposed to be a fun trip, just me and my stepdad Raymond. He's not my real dad, but he's always been good to me, always treated me fair. That morning started normal. The air was cool, but the sun was warm, and you could smell the pine trees so strong it almost tickled your nose. Raymond was making pancakes on this old, rusty griddle, and he let me put way too much syrup on mine. He was talking about maybe going fishing later if the weather held up. I was just excited to be out of the city, to be somewhere where you could run without someone telling you to watch for cars. After breakfast, I got bored. Raymond was cleaning up, and then he wanted to read his newspaper, the one he'd brought from town. He said I could go explore, but to stay close and not to go past the big fallen log we'd seen on the drive-in. I promised I would. I remember putting on my jacket, this blue one with a broken zipper, and heading out. The ground was soft under my sneakers, all covered in a carpet of brown pine needles and those little cone things. I wasn't scared or anything at first. I was just a kid messing around. I kicked at rocks, tried to see how far I could throw a stick, the usual stuff. I followed a little animal trail, the kind deer make, I guess. It wound away from the cabin, down a small slope into a denser part of the woods. The trees grew closer together here, and it got darker, like someone had turned down a dimmer switch on the sun. The sounds changed too. Back near the cabin, you could still hear the faint sound of Raymond clanking around, maybe a distant car. Down here it was just the wind in the tops of the trees and my own footsteps. I must have been walking for maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, just following this trail. I remember looking at my watch. It was one of those digital ones with a rubber strap, and it was just after 11 in the morning. I was thinking I should probably start heading back soon so Raymond wouldn't worry. That's when I heard the first crack. It wasn't a small twig snap. It was a big, heavy crack, like a thick branch breaking. It came from up ahead, maybe 50 feet away, behind a thicket of manzanita bushes. I froze right where I was. My heart, which had been beating all normal, just suddenly started hammering against my ribs, so hard I could feel it in my throat. My first thought was a deer, a big buck. I stood there, not moving, barely breathing, just listening. For a minute there was nothing, just the wind. Then I heard it again, another crack, and then a sound I can't really describe properly. It was like a low grunt, but deeper than any person, and it had a wet, rumbling quality to it. It wasn't a bear. I'd heard bears on TV, and this was different. This was heavier. I took a slow, careful step back, my eyes glued to the manzanita. Every little sound I made, the rustle of my jacket, the crunch of a pine needle under my heel, sounded like a gunshot in the quiet. I was trying to be so quiet, but my body was starting to shake. I took another step back, and then it stood up. It just rose up from behind the bushes. It was so fast. 1 second there was just bushes, the next, this thing was there. It was huge. I'm not just saying that because I was a kid. It was taller than any man I'd ever seen. It had to be 8 feet tall, maybe more. Its body was covered in hair, but it wasn't fur like a dog. It was long and shaggy and looked kind of dirty, a dark brownish-red color, like old rust, but the worst part was its shape. It was built like a man, a massive, powerful man, with broad shoulders and long arms that hung down past its knees. But its face, it wasn't a man's face. It wasn't a bear's face either. It was like someone had mixed them together. It had a heavy brow that stuck out, shadowing its eyes, which were so dark I couldn't see any color in them, just these two black pits. Its nose was flat and wide, and its mouth, it wasn't really lips. It was just a slash in its face, and I could see it was kind of open, and I saw these big, square-looking teeth. It just stood there, looking right at me. It didn't make a sound now. It was completely still. I could smell it, though. A smell hit me that made my stomach turn. It was a thick, heavy smell, like a wet dog, but mixed with something else, something rotten and musky, like old meat and dirt. That smell is something I'll never forget. It stuck in my nose. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. My brain was screaming at my legs to run, but they were just frozen sticks. I was staring right at it, and it was staring right back at me. Its eyes, those dark pits, they felt like they were pulling me in. I felt so small, so completely and utterly small and exposed. I was just a kid in a blue jacket with a broken zipper, and this thing was a giant, a monster from a nightmare that had somehow stepped into the real world. Then it took a step. Not a run, not a charge, just one slow, deliberate step towards me. Its foot was huge, and it didn't make a soft sound on the forest floor. It made a solid, heavy thump. That thump broke the spell. A sound came out of me, a kind of choked gasp, and then I spun around and I ran. I didn't think, I just ran. I crashed through the undergrowth, not caring about the branches that whipped at my face and arms, not following the trail anymore. I just ran in the direction I thought the cabin was. My lungs were burning, my legs felt like jelly, but this pure animal terror was fueling me. I could hear my own panicked breathing and the sound of my sneakers pounding on the ground. But underneath that, I heard something else. I heard it moving behind me. It wasn't running, not like I was. It was like it was loping, taking these huge, easy strides. I could hear the heavy, rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch of its feet, and it was getting closer. It was so much faster than me. I could hear its breathing too, this low, huffing sound, like a locomotive. I didn't dare look back. I knew if I looked back, I would see it, and I would freeze again, and it would get me. I tripped, my foot caught on a root, and I went flying, landing hard on my hands and knees. The pain shot up my arms, and the breath was knocked out of me for a second. I just lay there, gasping, sure that this was it, that it was on top of me. I scrambled to my feet, my knees stinging, my palms scraped and bleeding. I could still hear it coming, that steady, terrifying, crunching sound. It was so close now. I ran again, sobbing, tears blurring my vision. I didn't even know if I was going the right way. I just had to get away. Then, through the trees, I saw a flash of the cabin's brown roof. I've never been so happy to see anything in my whole life. I put everything I had left into a final sprint, bursting out of the tree line and into the clearing. I didn't stop running until I slammed into the front door of the cabin, fumbling with the handle, practically falling inside. Raymond was sitting at the table with his newspaper. He looked up, and his face went from surprise to alarm in half a second. I was a mess. I was crying so hard I could barely breathe. My whole body was shaking uncontrollably. My clothes were torn, my hands were bleeding, and I'm pretty sure I'd wet my pants. I just collapsed on the floor right inside the door, gasping and sobbing. Raymond was on his knees next to me in a flash, his hands on my shoulders. "David, David, what happened? Are you hurt? Did you fall?" I couldn't form the words at first. I just kept shaking my head, pointing back towards the woods. All I could get out between sobs was that there's a monster in the woods. He helped me up and sat me on the couch, getting me a glass of water. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold it. He was calm, but his eyes were serious. "Okay, son, okay. Just breathe. Tell me what you saw. Start from the beginning." And I did. I told him everything. About the cracking sound, the grunt, the smell, and then it standing up. I described it as best I could, the height, the hair, the face that wasn't a face, the way it looked at me. I told him about running, about hearing it chase me, the sound of its footsteps. I didn't leave anything out. I was crying the whole time, the fear just pouring out of me. When I finished, I looked up at him, expecting him to tell me it was my imagination, or a bear, or that I'd just gotten scared by a shadow. But he didn't. He just looked at me for a long time, his face really still. Then he put his hand on my knee and he said, "I believe you." Those 3 words meant everything. "You do?" He nodded. "David, I know when you're telling me the truth. I can see it in your eyes. You're not making this up. You saw something out there." The relief that washed over me was so powerful, it made me cry even harder, but this time it was a different kind of crying. He believed me. He called the sheriff's office from the cabin's phone. I sat there on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, still trembling, listening to him talk to them. He was calm but firm. He told them his stepson had a credible encounter with a large, aggressive animal and that it had chased him. 2 deputies came out maybe an hour later. They were nice enough, but I could tell they were skeptical. They asked me to tell the story again. I did, my voice still shaky. One of them wrote things down in a little notebook. Then they went out to look where I said it happened. They were gone for a long time. When they came back, their faces were kind of blank. They said they'd found tracks, but they were cow and deer tracks. They didn't find any sign of a bear. No scat, no hair on the trees, nothing like that. They didn't call me a liar, though. One of them said it could have been a very large bear, maybe a cinnamon bear, and the shadows and my fear could have made it look different. The other one joked that maybe it was a hermit who'd been living in the woods for too long. But Raymond, he just shook his head. He told them he wasn't seeing shadows, he saw what he saw. After the deputies left, Raymond got on the phone again. He called some of his friends, guys he hunted with. He was talking about organizing a proper search party, bringing hunting dogs up the next weekend to see if they could pick up a scent. He was taking it more seriously than anyone. The rest of that day is kind of a blur. I just sat on the couch, jumping at every little sound from outside. I couldn't eat any dinner. That night, when I tried to sleep, it was worse. As soon as I closed my eyes, I was back in the woods. I could see it standing up. I could smell that smell. I could hear its footsteps behind me. I woke up crying, my heart pounding, the sheets soaked with sweat. Raymond came in and sat with me until I calmed down. Before I finally fell asleep for a little while, I remember telling him, "I saw it. And if nobody else believes me, me and Jesus know that I saw it. It was something my grandma used to say. It just came out. That was the start of it. That Saturday. It's been a while now, but I still wake up crying some nights. The memory is just as vivid, just as sharp. The support from Raymond helps, knowing he never once doubted me. That helps a lot. But the fear, the raw, gut-twisting terror of looking into those dark eyes and knowing, just knowing, that I was looking at something that wasn't supposed to be real. That's something that's just a part of me now. I was just a kid, and I was face to face with it, all alone, and I ran, and I still don't know what it was or why it was there. I just know that it was. Story 2. We'd rented this little cabin just outside of Wayross, right near the tracks. It was cozy, nothing fancy, with a wooden porch that creaked if you stepped wrong, and a view of the woods that felt peaceful during the day. That day we'd been out since morning, filming trains as they passed through. There was me, another adult, a guy I'd met through the hobby, we'll call him Mike for simplicity, though that's not his real name, and 2 teenagers, his nephews, who were along for the trip. They were excited, full of energy, pointing at every train like it was the first one they'd ever seen. The air was cool for October, with that crisp smell of fallen leaves and damp earth, and the sky was clear, so we figured we'd stay out late to catch the night trains. As evening rolled in, we were set up near the cabin, maybe 50 yards from the tracks. We had our cameras on tripods, some snacks, and a couple of LED lights for when it got dark. The sun had dipped below the trees around 7, and by 9 p.m. it was fully dark. The kind of dark where you can barely see your hand in front of your face without a light. The stars were out, but the moon was just a sliver, so it didn't help much. We were laughing, talking quietly, so we didn't scare off any wildlife or disturb the peace when I first heard it, a rustling in the bushes off to our left. At first, I thought it was just a deer or maybe a raccoon. We'd seen plenty of those during the day, but this sounded heavier, like something big was moving through the underbrush. The leaves crunched underfoot, not in a quick, skittery way, but slow and deliberate. I remember feeling a little prickly on the back of my neck, but I brushed it off. Mike heard it too. He glanced over and shrugged like, probably nothing. The teenagers were focused on their cameras, whispering about the next train due in about 20 minutes. Then the rustling got closer, and I saw it, or at least I saw the eyes. Glowing green eyes, low to the ground, maybe 30 feet away. They weren't like any animal eyes I'd ever seen. Deer eyes reflect red or white, and raccoons are smaller. These were big, spaced apart, and they had this eerie glow that made my stomach twist. I nudged Mike and pointed, and he froze. The teenagers noticed our silence and turned to look. One of them, the younger one, let out a soft gasp. "What is that?" he whispered, his voice tight. I didn't know. The eyes just stayed there, unmoving, like whatever it was watching us. My heart started beating faster, and I could feel the cold seeping into my bones even though I was wearing a jacket. The air around us felt heavier, like a storm was brewing, but the sky was clear. Then the smell hit us, this foul, rotten odor that made me gag. It was like old meat left out in the sun, mixed with something earthy and decayed. Mike covered his nose, and one of the teenagers coughed. "That's disgusting," the older teen said, his voice shaky. The rustling started again, and this time it was accompanied by a low, guttural sound, almost like a growl, but deeper, more like rocks grinding together. I felt a chill run down my spine, and my hands started to tremble. I've been in the woods plenty of times, heard coyotes, even bears from a distance. But this was different. It felt intelligent, like it was sizing us up. Then the rocks started flying, not little pebbles, but fist-sized stones that came hurtling out of the darkness from the direction of the eyes. They weren't thrown randomly. They were aimed, with force, landing with heavy thuds on the tracks or whizzing past us. One hit the ground near my feet, kicking up dirt, and I jumped back. Mike shouted, "What the hell?" And the younger teenager panicked. He dropped his camera. I heard it clatter on the ground, and he bolted for the cabin, yelling something I couldn't make out over the pounding in my ears. The rest of us were frozen for a second, just staring into the darkness. The eyes were still there, glowing that sickly green, and now I could make out a massive figure crouched low behind them. It was huge, broader than a bear, and it moved with a fluidity that didn't seem right for an animal. My breath caught in my throat, and I fumbled for the LED light I had clipped to my belt. My fingers were numb, clumsy, but I managed to switch it on and shine it toward the eyes. That's when the terror really set in. The light hit the figure, and it stood up. It unfolded itself from that crouch, rising slowly until it was towering over us. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe more, with long, muscular limbs and a hunched posture. But it was the eyes that got me. They shifted from green to this amber color, like molten gold, and they locked onto mine. I felt like I couldn't move, like I was pinned in place by that gaze. The smell intensified, so thick I could taste it in the back of my throat, metallic and sour. For a second, everything was silent, except for the blood rushing in my ears. Then, without a sound, it stepped back into the bushes, disappearing from view as if it had never been there. The eyes vanished and the rustling faded away. The foul odor lingered, though, clinging to the air like a bad memory. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring into the empty darkness. Mike finally broke the silence, his voice rough. "We need to get inside, now." I nodded, my legs feeling like jelly, and we gathered up our gear as fast as we could. I grabbed the teenager's camera from where he'd dropped it, and we hurried back to the cabin, not looking back. The whole way, I kept expecting to hear something behind us, but it was dead quiet, like the woods were holding their breath. Inside, we locked the door and checked the windows. The younger teenager was huddled on the couch, shaking, and Mike tried to calm him down while I peered out the window. Nothing moved out there. The night was still, with only the distant sound of a train whistle breaking the silence. We stayed up for hours, talking in hushed tones, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. Was it a bear? A person? But bears don't throw rocks like that, and people don't have glowing eyes or smell that bad. We went over it again and again, but none of it added up. The rest of the night passed without any more activity. We didn't sleep much, if at all. Every little noise made us jump. The creak of the cabin, the wind rustling the trees. I kept replaying that moment in my head, the way it stood up and looked at me. It wasn't aggressive, not really, but it felt threatening, like a warning. The fear was a physical thing, sitting heavy in my chest, making it hard to breathe. The next morning, when the sun came up, we ventured out cautiously. The air was fresh, the smell gone, and everything looked normal. But as we walked along the tracks to pack up our stuff, we found it. A dead deer, maybe 20 yards from where we'd been standing. It was torn apart, not like a predator had gotten it, but ripped open in a way that seemed deliberate, almost brutal. The blood was dried, so it must have happened during the night. But there were no tracks around it that we could see, no signs of what had done it. That's when it hit me. Whatever we'd seen, it had been real, and it was strong enough to do that. We left Folkestone early, cutting our trip short. I haven't been back to that area since, and I don't think I ever will. Sometimes when I'm alone in the dark, I remember those amber-green eyes, and I get this cold knot in my stomach. I still don't know what it was, and I doubt I ever will. All I know is that something was out there that night, something that shouldn't exist, and it left me with a fear that stuck with me ever since. Story 3. It was one of those perfect spring days, the kind we don't get enough of in Ohio. The air was cool, but the sun was warm on my skin, and the woods around Lake White were just starting to get that fresh green look. I decided to take the long way around the lake, a path I'd walked 100 times before. I wasn't looking for anything more than some quiet, maybe to clear my head from a long week. I had my old backpack with a water bottle and a jacket just in case. I remember the exact time because I'd looked at my phone just before I left the main trail. It was a little after 2 in the afternoon. The path I was on veers away from the lake for a bit, cutting through a thicker part of the woods where the trees are packed in tight. It's quieter back there. The sounds from the road completely gone. All you can hear are your own footsteps and the birds. That day, the birds were going crazy. I remember thinking it was a bit odd, a real racket, but I didn't think much of it. I was just enjoying the walk, my mind wandering. I came around a bend where the ground dips down into a shallow gully. There's a small creek that runs through it, mostly just a trickle unless it's rained hard. And that's when I saw the deer. There were 3 of them, maybe 50 yards ahead on the other side of the creek. They were tense, their heads up, ears twitching, all focused on something deeper in the woods to their left. I stopped dead, my boots scuffing on a root. I'm not a hunter or anything, I just like watching them. They're skittish, and usually if they see you, they're gone in a second. But these deer weren't looking at me. They were frozen, staring into the shadows between the pines. I took a slow, careful step behind a big oak tree, peeking out from behind the trunk. My heart was beating a little faster, a kind of low-level excitement. I thought maybe there was a coyote or a bobcat in there. I'd heard stories, but never seen one. I remember the smell of the damp earth and the pine needles, sharp and clean. I remember the way the sun came through the canopy in broken pieces, making the forest floor look like a jigsaw puzzle of light and dark. Then I saw it. At first, my brain didn't know what to do with the information. It was just a shape, a wrong shape, standing maybe 70, 80 yards away, partly hidden by trees. It was tall, so much taller than a man, and broad, with these huge rounded shoulders that sloped down to a powerful-looking torso. It wasn't standing like a bear. Bears are sort of hunched, top-heavy. This thing stood upright, but not stiff. It had a posture, an alertness. Its body was covered in what looked like hair, but it wasn't shaggy, like in the movies. It was a dark, muddy brown color, almost black in the shadows, and it looked dense, like the fur on a wet dog. It was moving, not fast, but with a purpose that made the bottom drop out of my stomach. It was stepping, one foot in front of the other, with a fluid, quiet grace that seemed impossible for something that size. It wasn't crashing through the undergrowth, it was placing its feet, almost delicate, and its upper body barely swayed. It was stalking the deer. My breath caught in my throat. I could feel my pulse thumping in my neck. This wasn't excitement anymore. This was a deep, cold dread starting to uncoil in my gut. I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to see. I ducked down lower, my knees pressing into the soft, wet ground. The dampness immediately started seeping through my jeans, a cold, uncomfortable feeling I can still remember perfectly. I was trying to make myself small, to hide behind a clump of ferns and the base of the oak tree. I had to see more. I had to be sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. I craned my neck, peering through the leaves. The creature had stopped. It was standing behind a thick, old pine tree, its body mostly concealed. For a second, I thought it had vanished. The woods were dead silent. The birds had stopped singing. The only sound was the blood rushing in my ears. That's when I realized the deer behind me had gone quiet too. The complete lack of sound was heavier, more oppressive than any noise could have been. And then it moved its head. It leaned out from behind the tree. Just its head. It wasn't a jerky animal movement. It was slow, controlled, intelligent. It was looking directly at the deer, its head tilted slightly, assessing them. My view of its face was still partly blocked by branches, but I could see the profile. It had a heavy brow, a flat nose. It wasn't an ape, it wasn't a man. It was something else. Then it turned its head. It turned and looked right at me. Time didn't stop. It shattered. My mind didn't go blank like in a story. It just short-circuited. Every thought, every worry, every memory, it all just evaporated, replaced by a single screaming signal of pure, undiluted terror. Its eyes. They weren't reflective like a dog's. They were dark, deep-set, and they held an awareness that was utterly alien. It knew I was there. It had known I was there the whole time. It wasn't just looking in my direction, it was looking at me. It saw me crouched there in the dirt, trying to hide. I felt seen, completely and utterly exposed, in a way I have never felt in my life. My body went rigid. I couldn't have moved if I wanted to. I was a statue, frozen in that crouch, locked in its gaze. That's when the deer behind me exploded. The silence broke with a violence that made me jump. There was a simultaneous, thunderous crash of undergrowth as all three deer bolted at once. No warning, no snort, just pure blind panic. They weren't running away from the creature in front of them. They were running from me, from the tension that had just snapped. My presence, my stupid, clumsy hiding had ruined its hunt. The sound broke the spell on me, my body unlocked in a frantic, jerky motion. I scrambled backwards, my hands slipping on the wet leaves, my backpack scraping against the tree bark. I risked one last look. The creature was gone from behind the tree. It hadn't run, it had simply moved. It was already 10 yards away, heading diagonally away from me, toward the creek. Its movement was unbelievable. It didn't run on all fours. It ran on two legs, with a powerful ground-eating lope that was shockingly fast and completely silent. Its arms swung in a natural, coordinated rhythm. It was headed for the water, and it moved with a confidence, a familiarity, that made me think it used that creek like a road. It knew this land. It knew every tree, every dip, every stone. It didn't look back at me. It didn't roar or beat its chest. It just vanished into the thicker woods on the other side of the creek, its dark form blending into the shadows as if it had never been there. I didn't wait. I didn't think. I just ran. I ran like I have never run before. I crashed back up the path, branches whipping at my face and arms, not caring about the noise, not caring about anything except putting as much distance between me and that spot as humanly possible. My lungs burned. My legs felt like rubber. I remember the jarring impact of my feet hitting the ground, the stitch in my side, the taste of copper in my mouth. I didn't stop until I burst out of the tree line and onto the gravel parking lot near the lake's main beach. I fell against my car, my whole body shaking, gasping for air. I fumbled for my keys, my hands trembling so badly I could barely get the door unlocked. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, just breathing, the engine off. I kept looking at the tree line, half expecting to see it step out, to see those dark eyes staring at me from the shadows. But there was nothing, just the normal quiet woods. I drove home in a daze. The rest of the day is a blur. I took a shower and the hot water stung where the branches had scratched me, little red lines on my arms. I kept seeing its face, those eyes, that intelligent, calculating look. It wasn't a dumb animal, it was a hunter, a smart one. It used the land, it understood stalking, it understood being seen. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head. A person in a ghillie suit? No. The size was all wrong, the proportions were wrong, the way it moved was wrong. A bear? Absolutely not. Bears don't stand and walk like that. They don't move with that kind of fluid bipedal control. They don't stalk deer with that level of patience and strategy. What I saw that afternoon near Lake White was a predator, a real living, breathing thing that shouldn't exist, but does. I used to roll my eyes at those stories. I thought they were campfire tales for gullible people. I don't think that anymore. The terror of that moment, the eye contact, it's burned into me. It wasn't just fear of a large animal. It was the fear of being seen by something that knows you don't belong there, something that understands exactly what you are and what it could do to you if it wanted to. The coordinated flight of the deer, the way it used the creek as a path, the way it just disappeared, it all adds up to something I can't explain, something that changed what I believe is out there in the woods of Ohio. I haven't been back to that part of the lake since. I don't think I ever will. Story 4. I'm still not sure how to talk about this, even now. I'm safe. I'm in a warm apartment. I have a job I love, but sometimes I'll just be washing a dish or tying my shoes. And the memory of that one day will hit me so hard my hands go cold. It was a Tuesday. I remember because the garbage trucks would come on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the noise always woke me up. That was my calendar, the rumble of the trucks. I'd been living by the river for about 2 months at that point. The whole thing started when I lost my job, then my apartment. All of it just gone in what felt like a few weeks. My car was the last to go. I ended up in this patch of land tucked behind a public golf course, right where the manicured grass gave way to wild blackberry bushes, and then the riverbank. It wasn't a bad spot, all things considered. It was hidden from the path by a thick wall of coyote brush and those spindly cottonwood trees. In the mornings, the sun would hit the water and it would look like someone had scattered a bag of diamonds across the surface. I'd listen to the train whistles from the tracks a couple miles away, this long, lonely sound that somehow made me feel less alone. It was peaceful, or it was, until I wasn't the only one living there. A few weeks before that Tuesday, I'd been foraging further down the river, looking for mushrooms I knew were safe to eat, when I pushed through a particularly nasty thicket of thistles and saw it. An old brick building, just one story, with all the windows busted out and the roof caved in on one side. It looked like it had been part of a farm or something 100 years ago. The sight of it made my skin prickle. Not because of the building itself, but because it meant this place had a history. Other people had been here, and if there was one building, there might be others. It made my little camp feel less like my private sanctuary and more like just a piece of land that belonged to someone or something else. The day it happened started normal. It was hot, one of those first real scorches of the year. The air was thick and heavy, and the inside of my tent was like an oven by 10 in the morning. The only relief was the river. I waited until the afternoon, when the golfers were mostly gone and the place was quiet, and I went down to my usual spot, a little bend where the water was slow and formed a shallow, gravelly pool. I waded in. The cold was a shock, like 1,000 needles all over my skin, but the good kind. I just stood there, letting the current push against my legs, my eyes closed, feeling almost human for a minute. I remember the sound of the water, that constant shushing noise, and the smell of wet stone and hot dirt. I'm not sure how long I stood there before I heard it. It wasn't a loud sound. It was a splash, but not the random plop of a fish or a frog. This was a deliberate, playful kind of splash. Then another. I opened my eyes and looked upstream. My brain just stopped. It couldn't process what it was seeing, maybe 50 feet away. In the shallows where the water was only a few inches deep, there were two of them. They were upright, on two legs, wading in the water. At first, my mind screamed, bears, but they weren't. They weren't hunched over. They were standing straight, and they were tall, way taller than a man. Their bodies were covered in what looked like dark brown, almost blackish hair, but it was matted and wet, clinging to their frames. But it was their faces that froze the air in my lungs. They had flat faces, not snouts. They had wide-set eyes, a dark, intelligent brown, and their noses were short, almost like a human's, but flatter. Their mouths, I don't know, I couldn't see their mouths clearly, but the whole structure of their faces was just wrong. It was like looking at something that had been put together using pieces that were almost human, but arranged all wrong. The proportions were off, just enough to be deeply unsettling. They were playing. One would scoop up water in its hands. They had hands with fingers, I saw the fingers, and splash the other. They moved with a strange, fluid grace that was nothing like the lumbering gait of a bear. It was quiet too, just the splashing and a low, guttural chuffing sound like a quiet laugh. They were completely absorbed in each other, like kids, and they were between me and the path back to my camp. The fear that hit me then wasn't like any fear I'd ever felt. It wasn't the sharp panic of almost getting in a car accident. This was a deep, primal, cellular terror. It was the kind of fear that feels ancient, like a memory buried in your bones that suddenly wakes up and starts screaming. My heart wasn't just pounding. It felt like it was trying to hammer its way out of my chest. I could feel each individual beat in my throat, in my temples. I didn't breathe. I don't think I breathed for a full minute. I just stood there, statue still, the cold water suddenly feeling like a trap. Every instinct told me to run, but my legs were concrete. If I moved, if I made a sound, they would see me, and I knew, with a certainty I can't explain, that I did not want them to see me. Slowly, so slowly my muscles screamed in protest, I took a step backward. The gravel under my foot shifted with a tiny crunch. I froze again, my eyes locked on them. They hadn't noticed. One was now poking at a rock on the riverbed with a long, dark finger. Another step back, then another. I was backing away downstream, away from them, away from my camp, away from everything familiar. I didn't dare turn around. I kept my eyes on them, walking backward through the thigh-deep water, my arms out for balance. The current felt stronger now, like it was trying to pull me toward them. My mind was a frantic, repeating loop. Don't see me, don't see me, don't see me. I must have backed up 100 yards, around another bend, until they were completely out of sight. The second the line of trees hid them from view, I spun around and scrambled up the bank, my wet feet slipping on the mud. I didn't stop. I crashed through the undergrowth, thorns tearing at my jeans and shirt, not caring about the noise anymore, just needing to get to my tent, to my flimsy nylon walls, to some semblance of safety. I burst into my little clearing and dove into the tent, zipping the door shut behind me. I sat there, in the dim, hot space, hugging my knees to my chest. I was shaking so hard, my teeth were chattering. I was soaked and covered in mud and scratches, but I didn't care. All I could see were those flat, wide-set eyes. That wasn't an animal, that was something else. I spent the rest of that day and the entire night in that tent. Every sound from outside, the rustle of leaves, the hoot of an owl, the distant train, made me jump. I didn't sleep. I just sat there in the dark, listening, my heart still thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The peace of the place was gone. It felt charged, watchful. I was the intruder here. I had stumbled into someone else's home, and they had shown me, without even meaning to, that I didn't belong. The next day, the fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was edged with a desperate practical need. I was out of water. My bottle was empty. I had to go back to the river. The morning was overcast and grey, which felt fitting. The world had lost its colour. I moved like I was walking through a minefield, every sense on high alert. I took a different path, one that kept me in the trees as long as possible, my eyes scanning every shadow, every movement. That's when I saw it, a splash of brown and white in the tall grass near the edge of the tree line. It was a hawk, a red-tailed hawk, I think. It was on its side, one wing bent at a horrible angle, its chest heaving. Its eyes were wide with pain and terror. Seeing it there so broken and helpless did something to me. My own fear suddenly shrank, overshadowed by this immediate, sharp empathy. This was a living thing in trouble. I knew what that felt like. I forgot about the creatures. I forgot about everything. I knelt down, talking to it in a low, soft voice. "Hey, it's okay. Shh, it's okay." Its eyes followed me, wild and panicked. I didn't have much, but I was wearing my jacket, an old denim one that was too hot for the day but was all I had. I slowly took it off, moving with a slowness I didn't know I had in me, and gently draped it over the bird, covering its head to calm it. I could feel the frantic beat of its heart through the fabric. I bundled it up as carefully as I could, making a little nest with my jacket, and stood up, cradling it against my chest. Now what? I was homeless, broke, and holding an injured bird. I started walking toward the road, toward the golf course parking lot, with no plan other than to find help. I must have looked like a crazy person, standing by the side of the road in dirty clothes, holding a bundle in my arms. A few cars passed me without slowing. Then an old beat-up Toyota Tacoma pulled over. The window rolled down, and a guy, probably in his late 40s with kind eyes and a graying beard, looked out. "Everything all right?" he asked. I just blurted it out. "It's a hawk. It's hurt. Its wing is broken, I think." He didn't hesitate. He got out, came around, and looked at the bundle in my arms. "Okay," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I know a place. Get in." His name was David. He drove me to a wildlife rehabilitation center about 20 minutes away. He didn't ask me why I was out there by the river. He just talked about the bird, about how tough they are, how this place was really good. He paid the intake fee, which I found out later was $50. I tried to protest, but he just shook his head. "It's just money," he said. On the drive back, he asked me where I needed to go. The question hung in the air. I didn't have an answer. I think he saw it on my face. The exhaustion, the dirt, the hopelessness. He told me he owned a couple of rental properties and that one of his units was empty. He said I could stay there just for a little while until I got back on my feet. He said it so simply, like he was offering me a cup of coffee. I started crying. I couldn't help it. I just sat there in the passenger seat of his truck, sobbing while this complete stranger drove me to a new life. Later that afternoon, after he'd given me the keys and shown me the apartment, a small, clean miracle of a place, I knew I had to go back. I had to get my tent, my sleeping bag, the pathetic handful of things that were all I owned in the world. I was terrified to go back, but I had to. The sun was starting to go down when I got there, casting long, deep shadows through the cottonwoods. My camp was exactly as I'd left it, but something was different. On the flattened patch of grass in front of my tent, where I usually sat to put my shoes on, there were 3 objects placed neatly in a row. 3 perfect barred hawk feathers, the kind from the tail, and next to them 2 smooth grey river stones, each about the size of a chicken egg, worn smooth by centuries of water. I stared at them. The air left my lungs in a soft rush. They'd been here, they'd come into my camp, and they'd left these. The terror from the day before didn't come back. Instead, a completely different feeling washed over me, so powerful it made my knees weak. It was awe, a deep, humbling, profound awe. They had seen me. They had watched me help the hawk. They hadn't shown themselves, but they had seen, and this was their response. Not a threat, a gift, an acknowledgement. They weren't monsters. They were just the people who lived here. And for a moment, a single fleeting moment, I hadn't been an intruder. I had been a neighbor. I never saw them again. Not directly, but I know they're still there. David and I started a non-profit to help other people who've fallen on hard times, and I work part-time at that rehab center now, and sometimes when I go back to that stretch of the river, not to live, just to visit, I leave a little offering by the path that leads to the old brick building, a few apples, some nuts, and when I go back the next day, the food is always gone. And in its place sometimes I'll find a particularly interesting stick or a beautiful feather or another smooth grey stone. I keep 2 of those first stones in my pocket every day. When my hand closes around them, they're cool and solid and real. They're a reminder that in the middle of the darkest time of my life, something saw a moment of kindness in me, and that sometimes the most terrifying thing you can encounter isn't something that wants to hurt you. It's something that sees you, truly sees you, and decides to leave a gift instead. I still don't know what they were. I don't think I ever will. And maybe that's okay. Story 5. Okay, I'm just going to type this out. I've never told anyone, not a single soul, not even my dad, and it happened over 20 years ago. I'm writing this because I found this place online, and I figure if anyone might get it, it's you guys. I just need to get it out. It's been sitting in my gut all this time, this cold, hard knot of fear. I was 15 years old. It was the opening weekend of deer season, late November. The air had that bite to it that means business, the kind of cold that seeps right through your layers and settles in your bones. My dad and I were hunting in the Jefferson Proving Grounds in Indiana. If you don't know it, it's a huge old military place, miles and miles of woods and fields that feel different, quiet in a way that's not peaceful. It's a heavy quiet. We'd gotten to our spot hours before sunrise, hiking in with headlamps. The beams of light cutting through a fog so thick it felt like you could grab it. Our breath plumed out in front of us, and the only sounds were our boots crunching on frozen leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. My dad set us up in a good spot, a little ridge overlooking a creek bottom. He was about 50 yards away from me. That was his thing, teaching me self-reliance. You gotta sit still, you gotta be quiet, you gotta be patient, he'd always say. He gave me his old pump-action shotgun loaded with slugs. It was a cannon, heavy and solid in my hands. I remember feeling grown-up, trusted with it. The sun came up, a weak grey light that didn't do much to warm anything up. The woods came alive a little, squirrels chasing each other, birds flitting around. I saw a few does, but no buck. Hours passed. The initial excitement of the morning hunt wore off, replaced by the dull ache of cold and the boredom that comes with sitting perfectly still for too long. I'd eaten my granola bar, drunk my thermos of hot chocolate, and I was just there. The lack of sleep from getting up at 3 in the morning was starting to hit me hard. My eyelids felt like they had weights on them. I'd jerk my head up, realizing I'd started to drift off, and force myself to focus on the trees, on the way the bare branches looked like cracks in the sky. The last time I jerked awake, I decided I'd just close my eyes for a minute. Just a minute to rest them. I leaned my head back against the rough bark of the oak tree I was sitting against, the shotgun resting across my lap, the cold of the metal seeping through my gloves. The world faded away into a fuzzy grey nothing. I don't know how long I was out. It couldn't have been more than 10, 15 minutes. But I didn't wake up naturally. I woke up because of a sound. Crunch. It was a single distinct sound. Not a twig snap. This was different. This was a heavy, deliberate crunch of something big stepping on a patch of frozen leaves. It was close. Too close. My eyes flew open. Every muscle in my body went tight. I didn't move a millimeter. I just listened. My heart suddenly hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. I was facing the creek bottom, my back to the thicker woods behind the ridge. The sound had come from behind me. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Just the thumping of my own blood in my ears. Maybe it was a deer, I thought. A big one. Maybe it was my dad coming to check on me. Then it came again. Crunch, pause, crunch. It wasn't my dad. My dad walked like a man, even in hunting boots. This was heavier, slower. Each step had a weight to it that sounded immense. It was walking, not running, just a steady, casual pace, and it was coming up the ridge right behind me. I was frozen. I couldn't turn around. I was terrified that if I moved, even to swivel my head, it would hear me, so I just sat there, my back to whatever it was, listening to it get closer. The sound was maybe 30, 40 feet away now. I could hear the slight rustle as its leg brushed against a thorny bush. I could feel the vibrations in the ground through the seat of my pants. This was no deer. This was something else. The footsteps stopped. The silence was worse. It was a listening silence. I held my breath. My hands were clenched so tight around the shotgun my knuckles ached. I was shaking, a fine, uncontrollable tremor that started deep inside me and rattled my teeth. I had to see. I had to know what was there. The not knowing was going to make me scream. Moving slower than I've ever moved in my life, I began to turn my head. It felt like it took an hour. Every tiny shift of my neck, every creak of my jacket sounded like a thunderclap in the quiet. I got my chin over my shoulder, my eyes scanning the woods behind me, and I saw it, 30 feet away, just standing there, partly obscured by a cluster of young beech trees, but clear enough. My brain short-circuited. It just refused to process what my eyes were seeing. It was tall, so unbelievably tall. I'm 6 feet now as an adult, and I can tell you this thing would have towered over me. 9 feet, easy, maybe 10. It was built like a nightmare ape, but standing straight up on 2 legs. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, rounded with muscle that bulged under its skin. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, ending in hands that looked like they could crush stone. But it was the hair that I remember so clearly. It wasn't dark brown or black like you see in movies. It was this color, like dried wheat, a kind of dirty, streaky blonde, long and matted in places. It looked almost silvery in the dull grey light. It was just standing there, half turned away from me, looking down the ridge towards where my dad was. It seemed curious, not aggressive, just massive and present and utterly out of place. Then it turned its head. It looked right at me. Its face wasn't like a gorilla's. It was flatter. The brow ridge was heavy, but underneath that, the eyes. They were the most intelligent, the most aware eyes I have ever seen. They were a deep, dark brown, and they held a spark of something that was not animal. It knew I was there. It had known the whole time, and in that single, heart-stopping moment, I knew exactly what I was. Prey. It wasn't a thought, it was a primal, cellular understanding that flooded my whole body with a cold terror so complete, it felt like I'd been dipped in ice water. This thing, this creature, was so far beyond me in strength and power that my existence was entirely at its discretion. The shotgun in my lap, the one I'd felt so confident with, was suddenly the most pathetic, useless thing in the world. A slug might sting it, might make it mad. It wouldn't stop it. Nothing would stop it if it decided to cross those 30 feet. I was a rabbit hiding in a shallow hole, hoping the wolf would pass by. I stopped breathing. I didn't even blink. I just stared back into those intelligent, ancient eyes, praying to a God I didn't really believe in, that it would just lose interest, that I wasn't worth the trouble. My whole life didn't flash before my eyes. There was no room for that. There was only the terrifying present. The smell of damp earth and my own cold sweat, the feeling of the rough tree bark against my back, and the sight of that colossal thing looking at me. I thought about my dad, 50 yards away, completely unaware. I thought about how if this thing took me, there would be no struggle. It would just be over. I'd be gone, and they'd never find a trace. They'd think I got lost or ran away or fell in a sinkhole. They'd never know. The sheer, utter finality of that possibility was the most horrifying part, to just disappear. It felt like we stayed like that for an eternity, locked in that silent stare. Then it made a sound, a low, deep grunt, like air being let out of a giant tire. It wasn't a roar, it wasn't a threat, it was just a sound, a comment, and then it moved. It turned its head away from me, back towards the creek bottom. It took a step, then another. Its movements fluid and powerful for something so huge. It didn't run. It just walked, casually, deliberately, down the ridge and into the thicker timber. I watched its wheat-colored back disappear between the trees, the sound of its footsteps growing fainter and fainter until the woods were silent again. I didn't move. I stayed frozen in that spot for what felt like another hour, maybe more. I just listened, straining my ears for any sound of it returning. The woods were empty. The normal sounds, the birds, the squirrels were still gone. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Slowly, carefully, I finally moved. My body was stiff and aching from being clenched for so long. I stood up on shaky legs, my knees threatening to buckle. I kept the shotgun pointed in the direction it had gone, my finger on the trigger, even though I knew it was pointless. I started backing away, step by careful step, never turning my back on the spot where I'd seen it. I moved like that until I was sure I was out of sight of the ridge, and then I turned and half walked, half ran, stumbling through the undergrowth towards where I thought my dad was. I found him still sitting patiently on his stump. He looked up as I crashed through the brush, and his face went from annoyed to concerned in a second. I must have looked like a ghost. "What's wrong?" he asked, standing up. I opened my mouth to tell him. The words were right there. "Dad, there's a monster back there, a giant, hairy monster." But they wouldn't come out. They sounded insane, even in my own head. He'd think I'd fallen asleep and had a nightmare. He'd be disappointed, or worse, he'd go looking for it. So I did the only thing I could think of. I clutched my stomach and let my knees go a little weak. "I don't feel good, Dad," I mumbled. And I didn't have to fake the tremor in my voice. "I think I'm going to be sick. My stomach is killing me." He put a hand on my forehead. "You're ice cold. Must be a bug." He sounded disappointed, but more worried than anything. "All right, let's pack it in. We can come back tomorrow." He believed me. We gathered our stuff and hiked back to the truck in silence. I kept looking over my shoulder the whole way, expecting to see that wheat-colored shape moving between the trees. I didn't say a word. I just climbed into the passenger seat, put my head against the cold window, and stared out at the passing woods. We never went back the next day. I pretended I was still sick, and then the season ended. My dad never brought it up again. I think he just wrote it off as me not having the stomach for hunting. I never told him. I never told anyone. How could I? But I know what I saw. I can still feel the vibration of its steps in the ground. I can still see the intelligence in those dark eyes, the sheer, terrifying awareness. I can still feel that absolute primal certainty that I was looking at something that could end me without a second thought. and that the only reason I'm here today is because it decided to let me live. Story 6. The road was pitch black, the kind of dark you only get way out in the sticks. No street lights, no house lights, nothing. Just my headlights cutting a tunnel through the endless wall of pine trees on either side. My high beams were on, sweeping across the asphalt, and I was doing that thing you do on roads like that, constantly scanning the edges for deer. You see a shadow move, and your heart jumps for a second until you realize it's just a bush or a trick of the light. I'd seen 2 already that night, their eyes glowing in the dark before they bolted back into the woods, so I was on edge, but it was the normal kind of on edge, the I don't want to wreck my car kind. I remember the curve. It was a long, gentle bend to the left. I took my foot off the gas a little, just being cautious. As I came around the bend, my headlights swept across the road ahead and the right-hand shoulder, and that's when I saw it. At first, my brain did what any brain would do out there. It registered a large, dark shape standing just at the tree line. Moose, I thought. It had to be. They're huge, they're dark, and they stand like that sometimes, just staring. My hand tightened on the wheel, ready to hit the brake hard if it decided to wander into the road. I was maybe 150 yards away, closing fast, but then it moved. It didn't amble out like a moose. It didn't look clumsy or slow. It stepped out from the trees and onto the shoulder of the road with a purpose, and my stomach just dropped. It felt like a physical coldness spreading from my gut out to my fingers and toes. This wasn't a moose, this was something else entirely. The thing was massive, I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing absolutely dwarfed me. It had to be over 7 feet tall, easy. It was covered in this dark brown, almost blackish hair that was long and looked kinda shaggy. Its arms... God, its arms were so long, they hung down past its knees, swinging slightly as it moved. It had this huge barrel chest, like a powerful weightlifter, but it was all covered in that matted hair. The stride it had was unbelievable. It wasn't a walk, it was a powerful ground-eating lope. It was heading across the road, from my right to my left. I was probably doing 50, and I was still closing the distance. My high beams finally hit it full on, right as it was in the middle of my lane. And that's when I saw its face. I wish I hadn't. It had a heavy, pronounced brow ridge that shadowed its eyes. Its eyes, they were deep set, and for a split second, they caught the light and they glowed. Not white, like a deer's. This was a faint reddish glow, like 2 dying embers in the dark of its face. Below that, its nose was broad and flat, leathery looking, like old bark. It didn't have a snout like an animal. It was a face. A brutal, primitive face. But a face. It didn't look at me. It just kept moving, its head angled down like it was focused on getting to the other side. The whole thing, from when I first saw it to when it disappeared, took maybe 3 seconds. 3 of the longest seconds of my entire life. It crossed both lanes of the highway in 3 of those incredible strides. Its legs were so powerful. It didn't run. It just moved. It was fluid and fast in a way that something that big should not be able to move. It was like watching a force of nature. It reached the other side of the road and vanished into the tree line, just like that. 1 second it was there, a massive, impossible shape, and the next it was gone, swallowed by the blackness between the pines. My foot had found the brake and I was slowing down, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. I was maybe 30 yards from where it had crossed. I pulled the car over to the wrong side of the road, my tires crunching on the gravel shoulder, and I just stared into the woods where it had gone. My hands were shaking. I could feel a cold sweat on my forehead. My mind was screaming one word, over and over: Bigfoot. I've seen the shows. I've laughed at the blurry videos. I thought it was all a joke, or a myth, or just people misidentifying bears. But in that moment, there was no doubt in my mind. None. What I had just seen was a Sasquatch. There is no other word for it. I sat there for what felt like an hour, but it was probably only 20 or 30 seconds. The car was still running, the engine a low rumble that seemed deafening in the sudden silence. I was just staring into that wall of trees, my brain trying to process what my eyes had seen. The image was seared into me, the sheer size of it, the way it moved, that face. And then the trees started to shake. Not the small trees near the road. These were the big pines, the ones that are 50, 60 feet tall. The tops of them, way up high, started swaying violently. There was no wind. I'd had my window cracked open an inch, and the air was perfectly still. But the treetops were whipping back and forth, like something huge was plowing through the forest. Something so tall it was only disturbing the canopy. I could hear it too, a heavy, rhythmic crashing sound, like something big was snapping branches as it moved. Thump, crash, thump, crash. It was moving away from the road, fast. The sound and the shaking treetops receded into the distance, heading deeper into the mountains. That's when the fear really set in, the cold, primal kind of fear that sits in the base of your skull. The kind that tells you you are not at the top of the food chain. My breath was coming in short, sharp gasps. I felt like I couldn't get enough air. I fumbled for the gear shift, slammed the car into drive, and stomped on the gas. The tires spun in the gravel for a second before catching asphalt, and the car lurched forward. I didn't look back, I just drove. I pushed the speedometer up to 70, then 80, on a dark, winding two-lane road. It was stupid and dangerous, but I didn't care. I had to get out of there. Every shadow at the side of the road made me flinch. Every time my headlights lit up a stump or a large rock, my heart would skip a beat. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a massive dark shape keeping pace with the car, but there was only darkness. The next 10 miles were a blur of panic and white-knuckled driving. My mind was racing, replaying those 3 seconds over and over, the way its shoulders moved, the length of its arms, that reddish glow in its eyes. It was so vivid, so detailed. This wasn't a shadow or a fleeting glimpse. I had seen it, clear as day, in the full glare of my high beams. I finally saw lights up ahead. A gas station, a lonely little island of fluorescence in the middle of all that darkness. I've never been so relieved to see a run-down Shell station in my life. I pulled off the highway so fast I almost missed the turn, screeching to a halt in front of the pumps. I turned off the car, and the silence rushed in. I just sat there. The only sound was the ticking of the engine as it cooled down. I could still feel the adrenaline coursing through me, making my hands tremble on the steering wheel. I looked down at my hands and saw they were shaking uncontrollably. I tried to take a deep breath, but it hitched in my chest. I looked around the gas station. It was empty. A single car was parked near the convenience store, probably the attendant's. The buzz of the fluorescent lights was loud and annoying. It all felt so normal, so mundane. But I didn't feel normal. I felt like I had been peeled open and something fundamental inside me had been changed. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't need gas. I just needed to be somewhere that had light, somewhere that felt safe. But I didn't feel safe. I felt exposed. I kept looking out the windows, scanning the tree line across the highway from the station. It was the same kind of dense forest. What if it was in there? What if it had followed me? I thought about going inside, telling the attendant, but what would I say? Hey, I just saw Bigfoot down the road. He'd think I was crazy or drunk. I probably looked it. My face was pale, I was sweating, my eyes were wide. I just sat there, trying to get my breathing under control. The memory of it was so sharp, so physical. I could still feel the cold dread in my stomach. I could still see the way the hair on its arms swayed with its movement. I could smell the pine through my open window, and it was now tainted, forever linked to that thing. I must have sat there for 20 minutes, just staring at nothing. The reality of what happened started to sink in, and it wasn't excitement or wonder. It was a deep, unsettling horror. The world suddenly felt a lot bigger and a lot more unknown. That remote highway wasn't just a road through the woods anymore. It was a place where something impossible lived, something that could step out of the trees and look at you with red-tinged eyes and change everything you thought you knew. I finally started the car again and drove the rest of the way home. I didn't speed. I drove exactly the speed limit, my eyes constantly moving, scanning the darkness. I got home just as the sky was starting to lighten with the first hint of dawn. I walked into my quiet, dark house, and I sat on my couch, still in my jacket. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat there in the growing grey light, seeing that figure step out onto the road over and over again. It's been 6 months now. I've told 2 people, my best friend, who humored me, but I know he doesn't believe me, and my brother, who just said, "Whoa." That was it. I don't talk about it, but I think about it every day. I haven't driven that stretch of road since. I take a longer route now, adding 45 minutes to the trip whenever I need to go to Spokane. The memory hasn't faded. If anything, it's gotten clearer. I can close my eyes and be right back there, in that car, watching that thing cross the road in 3 steps. The sight of it is seared into my mind. I know what I saw. I know it was real. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I'll hear a branch snap outside my window, and my blood will run cold. And I'll remember those deep-set eyes with that faint red glow, and I know with a certainty that chills me to the bone that we are not alone out here. We never were. Story 7. It was the middle of July, and the air was so thick with humidity you could almost drink it. I was driving north on I-75, just past the Wolverine exit, heading up to my family's cottage on Mullet Lake. I make this drive every summer, have since I was a kid in the back seat, and this stretch of highway is usually dead. I mean, you might see a few cars, a semi-truck, but mostly it's just you, the asphalt, and a whole lot of pine trees. I was alone in the car, which I didn't mind. I had the windows down, the radio on some classic rock station that was fading in and out, and a half-eaten bag of sour cream and onion chips on the passenger seat. The sun was high and hot, beating down on the hood of my old sedan. I remember the steering wheel was almost too warm to touch. I was just cruising, not really thinking about much, just watching the trees blur into a green wall on either side of me. My mind was already at the lake, thinking about the cold beer waiting in the fridge and the way the water feels on a day like that. That's why the brake lights took me by surprise. Up ahead, a string of red dots lit up. I eased my foot off the gas, confused. There's never traffic here, not like this. It was a Tuesday afternoon, for God's sake. I slowed down, my car rolling to a crawl and then a complete stop. I could see maybe 6 or 7 cars ahead of me, all just stopped. No construction signs, no accident I could see, nothing. It was weird. I remember leaning forward, squinting over my dashboard, trying to figure out what the holdup was. That's when I saw it. Or more accurately, that's when I saw everyone else seeing it. Every single person in the cars ahead of me, and in the southbound lane too, was turned to the right, looking out their passenger side windows. Their heads were all cocked at the same angle, like a flock of birds that had all spotted the same thing at once. So I looked. To the right of the highway, the tree line is pretty dense. It's not a gentle slope into the woods. It's like the forest just starts right there, a solid wall of pine and birch and underbrush. And something was coming out of it. At first, my brain didn't want to process it. It was just a shape, a big, dark shape, pushing through the last of the ferns and saplings at the edge of the woods. Then it stepped fully onto the gravel shoulder, and my mind just stuttered. It was massive. I'm not talking about a big deer or a moose. I've seen those. This was something else entirely. It was walking on 2 legs, but they were thick, powerful-looking legs like tree trunks. Its whole body was covered in this shaggy, dark hair, almost black, but with a reddish tinge where the sun hit it. It was easily half again as tall as a tall man. My first stupid thought was, "That's a gorilla." But it wasn't. The proportions were wrong. Its arms were ridiculously long, hanging down past its knees, and its hands... This is the part that really got stuck in my head. Its hands weren't flat or open. They were curled under, like it was walking on its knuckles, but it was upright now. The fingers were long and thick, and they were just curled in on themselves, making these big, heavy-looking fists it was carrying. It didn't run. It didn't look at any of us. It just walked. It crossed the two northbound lanes at a steady, deliberate pace. Its gait was heavy, but not clumsy. It was purposeful. Each step looked solid, like it had weight to it, real weight. I could almost feel the thud through the pavement of my car. The hair on its body swayed with the movement. I remember seeing the muscles in its back and shoulders working under all that hair. It was powerfully built, like a wrestler or a weightlifter, but on a scale that didn't make any sense. My heart was hammering in my chest, a frantic, panicked rhythm. I couldn't breathe. I just sat there, my hands frozen on the steering wheel, my foot planted on the brake. My mouth had gone completely dry. This wasn't happening. I was tired from the drive. The sun was in my eyes. I was seeing things. That had to be it. My eyes darted to the car beside me, a blue SUV. A woman was driving, and she had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide and unblinking. She was staring at the same thing I was. She turned her head just slightly, and our eyes met for a split second through our windows. And in that moment, I saw it. It wasn't just confusion. It wasn't, what is that animal? It was pure, undiluted shock. It was fear. She saw it too. She saw the exact same impossible thing I was seeing. That look, that shared, silent confirmation is what made my stomach drop. This was real. The thing reached the grassy median. It didn't pause. It just stepped over the shallow ditch and started across the southbound lanes. Traffic there had stopped too. Everyone was watching. It was so quiet. The only sound was the idle of car engines and the faint whisper of the wind. Nobody was honking. Nobody was yelling. It was a scene of complete, stunned silence. It moved into the trees on the other side of the highway. It didn't crash through the brush. It just stepped into the shadows between the pines and was gone. 1 second it was there, this huge, dark figure, and the next, the forest had swallowed it whole. It was like it had never been there at all. For another few seconds, nothing happened. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, life started again. The cars in front of me began to move. The woman in the blue SUV drove off, not looking at me again. I put my foot on the gas, my hand trembling so badly I could barely keep the car in my lane. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see it standing there in the middle of the road, watching us go. But there was nothing, just empty asphalt. The rest of the drive to the cottage was a blur. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. A bear walking on its hind legs? No, I've seen videos of that. It's clumsy, comical almost. This wasn't that. The posture was all wrong, the gait was too smooth, and it was way, way too tall. A person in a suit, out here, in the middle of nowhere? For what purpose? It made no sense. The sheer size of it, the way it moved, it was alive. I knew it was alive. I could feel it in my bones. I pulled into the gravel driveway of the cottage a little after 4 o'clock. My hands were still shaking when I turned off the engine. I just sat there for a minute, listening to the ticks and pings of the cooling car, trying to get my breathing under control. The screen door slammed and my cousin came out. "Hey, you made it," he called, a beer already in his hand. I got out of the car, my legs feeling like jelly. I must have looked pale or something because his smile faded. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I just blurted it out. "I think I just saw Bigfoot." He stared at me for a second, then let out a loud, barking laugh. "What? No way. Where?" "On the highway, just past Wolverine. It crossed the road right in front of me." He was still laughing, shaking his head. "Dude, you've been driving too long. It was probably just a big bear. You know how they get in the summer." I tried to explain. It wasn't a bear. It was walking on 2 legs, like a person. It had these long arms and its hands were all curled up. My uncle walked out then, and my cousin immediately said, "Hey, listen to this. He thinks he saw Sasquatch on I-75. My uncle chuckled, a kind, dismissive sound. "Oh yeah? Well, tell him to come by the cottage. We've got a cold one for him." They both laughed, clinking their beer bottles together. I tried once more at dinner, with my aunt and a couple other family members there. I described it as best I could, the height, the walk, the way it just ignored all of us. They listened, but I could see the smirks they were trying to hide. My aunt patted my hand. "It's easy to get confused, honey. The light plays tricks out there on the road." That was the end of it. The subject was closed. They moved on to talking about the fishing forecast and whether we should get a new pontoon boat. I just sat there, pushing my food around my plate. The feeling in the pit of my stomach wasn't going away. It was a cold, heavy knot of unease. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat out on the porch by myself. The lake was calm, a vast sheet of black under a sky full of stars. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of quiet you only get up north. But for me, the quiet felt different now. It felt watchful. All I could think about was that thing, the way it moved with such unshakable purpose. It wasn't lost. It wasn't scared of the cars or the people. It was just going from one part of the woods to another, and we were all just temporary obstacles, insignificant. The complete lack of interest it showed in us was, in a way, more terrifying than if it had roared or charged. I kept replaying the moment it stepped out of the trees, the way the sunlight caught the reddish highlights in its dark fur, the sheer bulk of its shoulders, the heavy, solid sound its feet must have made, a sound I felt more than heard. The image of its curled hands is burned into my brain. They weren't paws, they were hands. I know what I saw. No one believes me, and maybe that's the part that bothers me the most. It's made me feel isolated, even in a room full of family. They think it's a funny story, a joke, but it's not a joke to me. It was the most real, most terrifying thing I have ever witnessed. That lingering unease hasn't left me. It's been weeks now, and I still think about it every day. When I'm walking from my car to my apartment at night, I find myself glancing into the shadows between buildings. When I'm out for a run and I pass a wooded area, my pace picks up. I find myself listening more carefully to the sounds of the night, straining to hear something beyond the crickets and the wind, because I know now for a fact that there are things in those deep north woods that we don't understand. Things that walk on two legs, that are impossibly big and strong, and that move through a world we think we own, like they own it. I saw one. It crossed a highway in the middle of a summer afternoon without a care in the world, and it left me here, sitting in the dark, trying to make sense of something that will never ever make sense. I can still see it, clear as day, stepping out of the trees and into my life, and I know with a certainty that chills me to my core that I will never feel truly safe in the woods again. Story 8. On that particular day, it was a Tuesday, I think, because we'd been there since the weekend, and the weather had been perfect, sunny but not too hot, with a cool breeze coming down from the higher peaks. My older brother and I, we were always close, and we'd decided to wander off from camp after lunch to skip stones in one of the creeks nearby. I remember the creek was called something like Silver Creek on the map, but to us, it was just this narrow, shallow stream with water so cold it made your fingers ache after a few minutes. The banks were lined with smooth, grey stones, and the water gurgled softly as it flowed over the rocks. It was one of those peaceful moments where you forget about everything else, just focusing on finding the perfect flat stone to send skimming across the surface. We'd been at it for maybe half an hour, laughing and competing to see who could get the most skips, when I first noticed something off. It wasn't a sound or anything obvious, more like a feeling, a prickling on the back of my neck. The woods around us were usually full of little noises, birds chirping, squirrels chattering, the rustle of leaves. But right then, it got quiet. Not dead silent, but the kind of hush that makes you stop and listen. My brother must have felt it too, because he paused mid-throw and looked at me, his brow furrowed. "You hear that?" he whispered, and I just shook my head, not sure what he meant. We stood there for a minute, not moving, just listening. The creek was still babbling, but everything else seemed to have gone still. Then upstream, maybe 100 yards away, I saw movement. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe an elk. We'd seen plenty of those around, but this was different. It was tall, way taller than any animal I'd ever seen, and it was moving on 2 legs. My heart started pounding right away, like someone had slammed a drum in my chest. I grabbed my brother's arm, and we both stared, not saying a word. The thing was running through the shallow water, coming straight toward us. It wasn't splashing around like a person would. It moved with this powerful, fluid grace, each stride covering a huge distance. The water only came up to its knees, but it never stumbled, never slowed down. As it got closer, I could make out more details. It had to be at least 7.5 feet tall, with a massive body that looked solid, like a tree trunk. Its skin, or what I could see, was covered in coarse, dark brown hair, almost black in some spots, with lighter patches here and there, like it had been sun-bleached or something. The head was what really got me, though. It sloped back sharply, with almost no neck to speak of, and it had these deep-set eyes that I couldn't see clearly from where we were, but I could tell they were dark and intense. Its arms hung down long, swinging slightly as it ran, and they were thick, like they could rip a branch right off a tree. The whole thing moved so fast, but it was almost silent. Just the sound of water splashing lightly under its feet, and this low, rhythmic breathing that I could barely hear over the creek. The smell hit me next, and that's something I'll never forget. It was strong and earthy, like wet dirt mixed with something rotten, like decay or old leaves. It filled the air around us, making my stomach turn. We were frozen, just standing there with our stones in hand, watching as it closed the distance. It passed within 40 yards of us, and for those few seconds, it felt like time had stopped. I could see its face more clearly now, a wide jaw, a flat nose that seemed almost pushed into its face, and those eyes, deep and dark, like pools of shadow. It didn't look at us, not directly, but I had this overwhelming sense that it knew we were there. Its expression was blank, focused, like it was on a mission and we were just in the way. Then, just like that, it ran past us and started climbing out of the creek onto the opposite bank. It didn't scramble or struggle, it just lifted itself out in one smooth motion, like it weighed nothing. The bank was steep and muddy, but it scaled it effortlessly, and then it vanished into the pine forest. No sound, no crunch of branches, nothing. It was as if the trees had swallowed it whole. The whole encounter couldn't have lasted more than 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When it was gone, the woods stayed quiet for a moment longer, and then the normal sound slowly crept back in. A bird chirped somewhere. The creek gurgled on. My brother and I just stood there, staring at the spot where it had disappeared. My legs felt like jelly, and I was shaking all over. I could hear my own heart beating in my ears, loud and fast. "What the hell was that?" my brother finally said, his voice shaky. I couldn't answer. I just shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. We dropped the stones we were holding and started backing away from the creek, not taking our eyes off the tree line. Then, without a word, we turned and ran. We ran as fast as we could, stumbling over roots and rocks, not caring about the branches slapping our faces. The camp was only a few hundred yards away, but it felt like miles. I kept expecting to hear something behind us, footsteps or breathing, but there was nothing. When we burst into the clearing where our tent was set up, my parents were sitting by the fire, drinking coffee and talking. They looked up, startled, and my mom stood up right away. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice concerned. We were both panting, covered in sweat, and I could see the fear in my brother's eyes. I tried to explain, but the words came out in a jumble, something about a big animal, a creature running in the creek. My dad laughed at first, thinking we were messing around, but when he saw how pale we were, he got serious. We told them everything, describing the thing as best we could. My dad grabbed his rifle, he always brought it camping just in case, and went down to the creek with my brother to check it out. I stayed back with my mom, who was trying to calm me down, but I couldn't stop shaking. I kept smelling that earthy decay smell like it was stuck in my nose. After a while, my dad and brother came back, and my dad said they didn't see anything. No tracks, no signs, nothing. The creek was just how we left it, with our stones still lying on the bank, but I knew what we saw. The image was burned into my brain, the way it moved, the smell, the sheer size of it. We spent the rest of the day in camp, not venturing far, and everyone was on edge. My parents tried to brush it off as a bear or something, but bears don't run on two legs like that, and they sure as hell don't smell like wet dirt and decay. As the sun started to set, the woods got darker, and every little noise made me jump. I couldn't eat much at dinner, and when we went to bed I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the sounds outside, half expecting to hear that thing again. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it running toward us, those deep-set eyes fixed on some point ahead. I kept thinking about how close it was, how it didn't even seem to notice us. But I knew it had to. Why else would it have been there? The next day, we packed up and left early, and I never went back to that spot. To this day, I can't explain what it was, but I know it was real. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the woods or even just walking at night, I get that same prickling feeling on my neck. And I remember that 30 seconds in late May 1996, and I wonder if it's still out there. Story 9. Okay, I'll try to write this. I've never really written it all down before, and just thinking about it again makes my hands feel a little shaky. But I see people talking about their own stuff on here, and I guess it's time I get mine out. This happened a long time ago, back in the mid-80s. I think it was maybe 1986 or 87. I was just a kid then, maybe 12 or 13. It was a Friday night in late summer, the kind where the heat from the day just hangs in the air even after the sun goes down. My stepdad had this idea that we should go night fishing. He was always trying to find things for us to do together, him and me and my older brother. I think he was trying hard to make us feel like a real family. My brother was less than thrilled. He was a teenager and would have rather been anywhere else. But I didn't mind. I liked fishing, even if we never caught much. We lived in Monroe County, Tennessee, a place with a lot of woods and hills. The spot he picked was this lake that sort of straddled a main road. On one side was the pavement, and on the other was the water. And right behind where we set up was this steep, thickly wooded ridge that went straight up into the darkness. It was a place we'd been to before during the day, but never at night. At night, it was a whole different world. We got there just as the last light was fading. We set up our folding chairs on this little gravel pull-off right by the water's edge. The van was parked maybe 10 feet behind us, its big side facing the lake. My stepdad had this old beat-up Dodge van, the kind with the shag carpet inside and those weird little pop-out windows. We got our fishing poles ready, baited the hooks with night crawlers, and cast our lines out into the black water. The only sounds were the frogs croaking and the occasional buzz of a car going by on the road behind us. The fishing was slow, real slow, like nothing was biting slow. We'd been out there for what felt like hours, and we hadn't gotten a single nibble. The boredom was starting to set in. My brother was complaining under his breath about being bored and wanting to go home. My stepdad was trying to stay positive, saying stuff like, "The big ones bite at night, just you wait." But I could tell he was getting restless too. We were all just sitting there in the dark, listening to the silence, waiting for something that wasn't happening. That's when the noises started. At first it was just little things, a rustle in the leaves up on the ridge behind us, a snap of a twig. We didn't think much of it. My stepdad said it was probably just a raccoon or a possum, It's the woods, right? There's always something moving around. But the noises didn't stop. They kept going, and they seemed to be moving. Not like an animal just scurrying through, but like something was walking, pacing almost. You'd hear a crunch of leaves in one spot, then a few seconds later, another crunch a little further along the ridge. I remember feeling a prickle on the back of my neck. It was probably nothing, I told myself, just a deer, but it didn't sound like a deer. Deer are usually lighter on their feet, more graceful. This sounded heavier. Every time a car would pass on the road, its headlights would sweep across the lower part of the ridge for a second, and we'd all stare into the woods, but we couldn't see anything, just pitch blackness once the light was gone. My brother, he was getting jumpy. He kept shining his flashlight up into the trees, but the beam was weak and it just got swallowed up by the darkness. "There's nothing there," my stepdad said, his voice low. "Just sit still." But then we heard a different sound. It was a low crack, like a decent-sized branch had just been broken. Not stepped on, but broken with force. It came from maybe 30-40 feet up the ridge, directly behind us. That was too close, way too close. My stepdad stood up slowly, his fishing rod forgotten in his chair. "Shine the light up there," he whispered to my brother. My brother fumbled with the big metal flashlight, his hands clumsy. He finally got it on and pointed the beam up the slope. He swept it back and forth across the wall of trees and undergrowth. Nothing, just leaves and shadows. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My stepdad started to sit back down, and then my brother moved the light one more time. That's when we saw them. A pair of eyes. They were high up, way higher than a man's would be, maybe 7 or 8 feet off the ground, and they were glowing. Not like a cat's eyes, which reflect light. These were a solid, bright orange, like 2 hot coals just burning in the dark. They weren't moving. They were just staring right at us. The fear that hit me was instant and total. It was a cold wave that washed over my whole body, from my scalp down to my feet. It wasn't just being scared. It was a deep, primal terror, the kind that tells you you are not the top of the food chain. My stomach dropped. I couldn't breathe. I just stared back at those 2 orange dots in the blackness. Nobody said a word for what felt like a full minute. We were frozen. My stepdad was the first one to move. He very slowly reached over and took the flashlight from my brother, whose hand was shaking so bad the beam was jittering all over the place. My stepdad held the light steady, right on those eyes. They didn't blink. They didn't look away. Then my stepdad spoke, and his voice was a tight, strained whisper I'd never heard from him before. "Get in the van now." That broke the spell. We moved. We didn't run, but it was a frantic, panicked scramble. We didn't care about the fishing poles, the chairs, the cooler. We just dropped everything and scrambled for the van. I remember the gravel crunching under my shoes, the sound incredibly loud in the silence. My stepdad was backing towards the van, still holding the flashlight on those eyes, like he was keeping it at bay. My brother yanked the sliding side door open and practically threw me inside before diving in after me. I scrambled over the shag carpet into the back seat. My stepdad finally turned, flung the flashlight into the van. It clattered on the floor and jumped into the driver's seat, slamming his door shut. He fumbled with the keys for a second, his hands shaking, before he got the engine to turn over. The sound of it roaring to life was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. He threw it into drive and stomped on the gas. The tires spun on the gravel for a second before catching, and the van lurched forward onto the pavement. He didn't even turn the headlights on for the first few seconds. He was in such a hurry to get away from that spot. When he flicked them on, the road lit up in front of us. We were all breathing hard, panting like we'd just run a mile. No one was talking. We were just trying to process what we had just seen. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst. I looked out the back window, but it was just blackness. We'd gotten away, and then it happened. A massive, deafening bang exploded from the roof of the van. It was so loud, so sudden, it felt like the whole vehicle had been hit by a train. The entire van shook with the impact. I screamed. My brother yelled, "What the hell was that?" My stepdad swerved, the tires squealing on the asphalt before he got the van under control again. He didn't slow down, he just pressed the gas pedal harder. My eyes were locked on the roof of the van. I was waiting for the metal to tear open. I thought for sure something had landed on us. Something big. Something that had jumped from the ridge onto the roof of a moving vehicle. My mind was reeling. What could do that? Nothing. Nothing could do that. We drove the rest of the way home in total silence, just the sound of the engine and the wind rushing past. Nobody spoke. We were all just staring straight ahead, or in my case, up at the roof, waiting for another sound, another impact. The 10-mile drive felt like it took 100 years. Every shadow on the side of the road looked like a lurking shape. Every tree looked like it could be hiding those orange eyes. When we finally pulled into our driveway, my stepdad killed the engine, and we just sat there for a minute, listening to the engine tick as it cooled down. The normal sounds of our neighborhood, crickets, a distant dog barking, sounded weird and out of place. My stepdad was the first to get out. He walked around to the front of the van and looked up at the roof. I saw his body go rigid. "Boys," he said, his voice quiet and strange, "come look at this." My brother and I got out, our legs feeling like jelly. We walked around to stand beside him and looked up. There, in the middle of the van's roof, was a rock, a huge, jagged rock. It was the size of a big cantaloupe, dark and dirty. It was just sitting there, right in the center of the roof, which was now dented inward in a shallow crater around it. My stepdad, after a long moment, reached up and tried to move it. He grunted with the effort. He had to use both hands. He managed to shift it a little, but he couldn't lift it off one-handed. It was that heavy. He finally braced himself and, with a huge heave, pushed it off the side of the van. It hit the driveway with a solid, heavy thud that seemed to shake the ground. We all just stared at the rock lying there in the gravel. The silence was thick and heavy. That rock was too big, too heavy. There was no way a person could have thrown it, not from the ridge onto the roof of a moving van. The physics of it were impossible. It would have taken a catapult or something with immense strength, and that's when I remembered the other thing. In the chaos, right after the bang, in that split second of stunned silence before my brother yelled, I had heard something else. A sound. It was muffled, like it was coming from outside, but it wasn't an animal sound. It was talking. It wasn't clear words, not like English. It was a low, guttural, rumbling sound, like two voices talking over each other in some kind of argument. It was there and then it was gone, swallowed by the wind and the sound of the engine. I didn't say anything at the time. I thought maybe I'd imagined it, but looking at that rock, I knew I hadn't. This wasn't the first weird thing either. A few months before, we'd been out in the woods behind our house and we'd heard this crazy sound. It was a scream, but not like a fox or a rabbit. It was deeper, louder, full of rage. We'd even recorded it on an old tape recorder. We played it for some of the older guys who'd hunted these woods their whole lives, and they just shook their heads. They said they'd never heard anything like it. We just called it the varmint and tried to forget about it. But you can't forget. Not after a night like that. We weren't just scared in that moment. We felt hunted. We felt like whatever was up on that ridge had seen us, had targeted us, and had the power to let us know it wasn't happy we were there. It threw a rock at our van, a rock so heavy a strong man would struggle to lift it, and it threw it with enough force to dent the roof of a moving vehicle. We never went back to that lake. My stepdad sold the van a few months later. We never talked about it much as a family. It was like this unspoken agreement to just pretend it never happened. But it did happen. I saw those orange eyes. I felt the van shake from the impact. I saw that rock on the roof. And sometimes, even now, all these years later, if I'm out in the woods and it starts to get dark, I'll get that same cold prickle on the back of my neck. I'll find myself looking up into the trees, into the shadows, And I'll wonder if those two orange coals are watching me again. I don't know what it was. I don't have a name for it. I just know that for one night, on a quiet lake in Monroe County, something in the dark knew we were there, and it wanted us to know it was there too, and it made sure we got the message. Story 10. It was one of those perfect late summer days in the Pacific Northwest, the kind that makes you forget about the 9 months of rain. The year was 1980. I was 48 years old, feeling it in my knees but not in my spirit, and I'd driven out to the Indian Heaven wilderness, just outside of Carson. I'd been retired from the mill for 2 years at that point, and metal detecting had become my thing. It got me out of the house, kept my mind occupied. My wife, God rest her soul, had always said, I needed a project. This particular spot wasn't easy to find. It was an old Native American racetrack I'd read about in a local history booklet from a second-hand shop. The booklet was falling apart, but it described this long, flat clearing deep in the woods, a place where tribes from all over would gather for games and races, way back when. It sounded like the kind of place where you might find something, a lost trade bead, an old knife blade, anything. I wasn't a treasure hunter looking for gold. I was just a guy looking for a piece of the past. The hike in was about an hour and a half, all uphill. The air was cool and carried that clean, damp smell of pine needles and fir trees. I had my old army surplus pack on my back, loaded with a sandwich, a thermos of coffee, my camera, a first aid kit, and my .22 caliber revolver, which I always carried more for the noise to scare off a curious bear than anything else. In my hands was my White's metal detector, a heavy thing but reliable. When I finally broke through the tree line into the clearing, it was just like the booklet said. It was this long, beautiful stretch of open land, maybe 100 yards long and 30 yards wide, carpeted in soft grass and moss. The sun hit it full force, warm on my face. It felt old, quiet in a way that wasn't just the absence of sound, but a deep, settled silence. You could feel the history. I started at one end, sweeping the coil in slow, methodical arcs. The detector chirped a few times on old bottle caps and what turned out to be a rusty tent stake, probably from some camper in the 60s. I was patient. That's the key to this hobby. You have to be willing to dig up a lot of junk for one good find. After a couple of hours, my lower back was starting to ache from being hunched over. The sun was high overhead and it was getting warm. I decided to take a break. I walked over to a fallen log at the edge of the racetrack, right where the trees started again. I set my metal detector down carefully against the log, took off my pack, and propped it up next to it. I remember stretching my arms over my head, my spine cracking in a satisfying way. I needed to take a leak, something I'd been putting off. I walked maybe 15-20 paces into the woods, just enough to get some privacy behind a thick fir tree. It was stupid. I know that now. You don't leave your gear out of your sight out there. But it was so peaceful, so quiet. It felt safe. I was just finishing up when I heard it. Chirp. It was the sound of my metal detector, a clear, high-pitched electronic chirp, the exact sound it makes when the coil passes over metal. My first thought was pure confusion. Did I not set it down right? Did it fall over? But it was a heavy unit, and I'd leaned it securely against the log. I stood perfectly still, my heart giving a single, hard thump against my ribs. The sound didn't come again. The forest was dead silent. Not even a bird chirped. That was the first thing that really got to me, the sudden absolute silence. A minute ago, there'd been the usual forest background noise. Now, there was nothing. I zipped up my pants slowly, not making a sound. A cold trickle of unease ran down my back. I took a step back toward the clearing, my boots making almost no noise on the soft duff of the forest floor. Chirp. There it was again. Unmistakable. Someone or something was over by my gear, triggering my detector. anger mixed with the fear then. Some son of a bitch was trying to steal my stuff. I crashed back through the ferns and low-hanging branches, no longer trying to be quiet. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice loud and rough in the stillness. "That's my gear! Get away from there!" I burst out of the tree line and into the sunny clearing. The log was there. My metal detector was still leaning against it, untouched, but my pack was gone. It was just gone. The spot where I'd left it was empty. A few blades of grass were bent over. That was it. My brain couldn't process it. It made no sense. I'd only been gone for a minute, maybe 2 at the most. I scanned the clearing, my head whipping left and right. Nothing. The racetrack stretched out, empty and sun-drenched. Then my eyes caught movement way down at the far end. Something was running down the center of the racetrack. My first fractured thought was, bear. But it was all wrong. It was running on 2 legs. Not clumsily, not like a bear trying to sprint for a few steps. It was running with a smooth, powerful, galloping gait. Its legs were pumping, and its long arms were swinging. It was covered in shaggy, dark brown hair, almost black, that rippled with its movement, and it was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing made me feel small. It had my bright orange pack slung over one of its arms like it was nothing more than a lunchbox. I stood there, frozen, for a second that felt like an hour. My mind was screaming a dozen different things at once. What is that? Is that a man? No, no man moves like that. Is it a gorilla? But it didn't move like any gorilla I'd ever seen on television. Its run was fluid, fast, and had a strange, loping rhythm to it, like a camel. That's the only thing I can compare it to, the galloping gait of a camel, but on 2 legs. It was covering ground at an incredible speed, already more than halfway down the length of the racetrack. Fear, pure and cold, finally unlocked my legs. "Stop!" I screamed. The word tore out of my throat, raw and desperate. "That's mine! Stop!" The thing didn't stop, but it did something that chills my blood to this day, just writing it down. As it ran, its head, which had been facing forward, turned. Just its head. It glanced back over its shoulder at me. I didn't see eyes. I didn't see a face. The head was large and blocky, and all I registered was a dark, featureless patch where a face should be. There was no expression, no snarl, nothing. It was just a look, a quick assessing glance, and then it turned its head back and kept running, its powerful legs driving it forward even faster. That look, it wasn't animal, it wasn't human, it was something else, something that knew I was there and simply did not care. It reached the end of the racetrack and disappeared into the tree line without even breaking stride. 1 second it was there, a massive, dark, galloping shape, and the next, the forest had swallowed it whole. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. I don't know how long I stood there, just staring at the spot where it had vanished. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my temples. My hands were shaking. I finally forced myself to move, my legs feeling like wood. I walked over to my metal detector, picked it up just to have something solid in my hands. It felt familiar. Normal. Everything else was not normal. I knew I had to get out of there. The urge to run was overwhelming, a primal scream in my head, but something pulled me down the racetrack toward the spot where I'd last seen it. I had to see. I had to know. I walked the whole length of that clearing, my eyes glued to the ground. When I got to the end, to the point where it had entered the woods, I saw them, footprints. They were pressed deep into the soft, damp earth at the tree line. I slowly lowered myself into a crouch, my knees protesting. I just stared. They were huge. I wear a size 10 shoe. I placed my boot right next to one of the prints. My boot fit inside it with room to spare. I'm not talking about a little bit bigger. I'm talking about my entire foot, plus what looked like another 7 inches in front of my toes. The print was long and wide, with a clear arch and 5 discernible toes. They weren't blurry or misshapen like a bear's. They looked functional, purposeful. The thing that made my stomach clench was the depth of the impressions. This thing was heavy, unimaginably heavy. I stood up so fast I got dizzy. That was it. The last thread of my courage snapped. I turned around and I ran. I didn't care about my pack, my sandwich, my camera. I just ran. I crashed back through the woods the way I had come, branches whipping at my face and arms, not caring about the path, just going downhill, away from that clearing. The metal detector was heavy in my hand, banging against my leg, but I wasn't letting go of it. It was the only piece of my old life I had left. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck. Parked off the old Forest Service road, I fumbled the keys, dropped them in the dirt. My hands were shaking so badly. I finally got the door open, threw the detector onto the passenger seat, and scrambled in, locking the door behind me. I sat there for a long time, just breathing, trying to get my heart to slow down. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, expecting to see that shaggy, dark shape emerging from the trees. I drove straight to the ranger station in Carson. I must have looked a sight, covered in sweat, dirt, and small scratches, my eyes probably wild. The forestry official behind the counter was a young guy, maybe in his 20s. He listened to me, his face neutral, as I spilled the whole story out in a jumbled mess. I told him about the racetrack, about my pack being stolen, about the thing I saw, its run, the look it gave me, the footprints. When I finished, he just nodded slowly. "We get reports like this sometimes," he said, his voice calm, almost bored. "Mostly bears. A bear standing on its hind legs can look pretty big, especially if you're startled, and they'll steal anything with a smell to it." "It wasn't a bear," I said, my voice tight. "It ran on 2 legs, the whole way. And the footprints, I saw them." He gave me a faint, patronizing smile. "Tracks can be misleading. Mud shifts, water distorts them. A big old black bear print can look mighty strange sometimes." He took down my information, my description of the missing pack, and promised to keep an eye out. I knew what that meant. It meant he was filing it away with all the other crackpot Bigfoot stories. He didn't care. He hadn't been there. He hadn't seen the way it moved, that effortless, galloping run. He hadn't felt the intelligence in that glance over its shoulder. I drove home in a daze. My wife was gone, so there was no one to tell, no one to try and convince. I just sat in my living room in the dark, going over it again and again in my head. The thing I kept coming back to, the thought that made my blood run cold then, and still does now, was my .22 revolver. It had been in my pack. In the moment, when I was screaming at it to stop, a part of me had been furious enough to fight. If I'd had that gun in my hand instead of in the pack it was stealing, I might have drawn it. I might have fired a warning shot. Or worse, I might have shot at it. Looking at those footprints, seeing the raw power in its gait, I knew with a cold, certain clarity that my little .22 would have been worse than useless. It would have been a provocation. It would have been like throwing a pebble at a grizzly. That thing, whatever it was, could have torn me apart without even slowing down. The fact that it didn't, that it just took my pack and kept running, felt like the only piece of luck I had that entire day. It had my food, my camera with its potential proof, my first aid kit. But it had left me with my life. I never went back to that racetrack. I still go metal detecting, but I stick to old parks and public beaches now. I never go into the deep woods alone, and I never ever let my pack out of my sight. It's been over 40 years. I'm an old man now. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night and the house is quiet, I'll close my eyes and I'm back in that sunlit clearing. I see the shaggy dark form galloping away with that impossible speed. I feel that glance, that empty, knowing look over its shoulder. And I know, as sure as I know my own name, that something is still out there in those old, quiet woods. Something that doesn't belong in any book, any story, any sane man's world. And it's fast. My God, it was fast. Story 11. It was one of those warm Wisconsin evenings in late August, the kind where the air feels thick and heavy, like you're breathing through a warm, damp cloth. The sun was starting to dip, casting long, stretched-out shadows from the pine trees, turning everything a kind of hazy orange. I was in the passenger seat of my cousin's beat-up Ford pickup, the kind with the vinyl seats that stick to your legs. The windows were all the way down, and the wind was whipping through the cab, loud enough that you had to raise your voice to be heard over the roar of it and the crunch of gravel under the tires. We were out in Marinette County, way out on these back roads that are more like suggestions of a path than actual maintained roads. We were checking for deer. Not hunting, not yet, just scouting. Seeing where they were feeding, looking for tracks, that kind of thing. It's something we've done for years, a tradition. My cousin was driving, his hands loose on the wheel, and I was just leaning my head against the window frame, letting my arm hang out, feeling the rush of the air. The smell was pure north woods, pine needles, damp earth, that faint sweetness of decaying leaves. We'd been at it for a couple of hours, not talking much, just pointing out a fresh scrape on a tree or a set of tracks in the soft shoulder. The light was getting that low, golden quality that makes everything look beautiful and a little bit mysterious. We came up to a T-intersection, one of those places where our dirt and gravel road met another one just like it, a crossroads in the middle of nowhere. My cousin brought the truck to a complete stop. There was no stop sign. It was just courtesy, a habit from knowing these roads could hide another vehicle coming the other way. The engine idled, a low, rumbling vibration through the whole truck. The dust we'd kicked up slowly settled around us like a faint brown ghost. I remember looking to the right, down the other road, just scanning the tree line out of habit, and that's when I saw it. About 10 yards away, just at the edge, where the scraggly underbrush met the gravel, there was a large brown animal. It was on all fours, its back to us, and it was big. I mean, really big. My first split-second thought was, that is the largest damn wolf I have ever seen. But it was too bulky for a wolf. Then I thought bear cub, but it was the wrong color, a uniform matted brown like wet bark, and it seemed wrong. Its proportions were off, its shoulders were too high, its back too straight for a bear on all fours. It was maybe 4 feet tall at the shoulder, just a solid muscular mass of brown fur. I didn't say anything, I just stared, my brain trying to file it into a category, bear, moose, something, anything, and failing. It was just there. And then the middle part happened, the part that replays in my head over and over in perfect, terrible clarity. It moved. It didn't turn around. It didn't amble. It just unfolded. It was the fastest thing I have ever seen a living creature do. 1 second it was a quadruped, a low-slung, powerful animal. In the space of a single heartbeat, it was upright. It rose with an unnatural, fluid speed, like a time-lapse video of a flower blooming, but made of muscle and intent. Its legs straightened, its torso uncoiled, and it just kept going up and up and up until it was towering over the brush. It had to be over 8 feet tall. I'm 6 feet even, and this thing made me feel like a child. It was impossibly, terrifyingly huge. The sheer verticality of it hit me in the gut like a physical blow. It was no longer an animal, it was a presence, and it was looking right at us. Its head was blocky, and it didn't have a long snout like a bear. The face was flatter, darker, almost like old leather. I couldn't make out distinct eyes from that distance, just dark pits, but I felt its gaze. I felt it lock onto me through the windshield into the cab of the truck. It was an intelligent stare, a calculating stare. It wasn't the dumb curiosity of a deer or the simple aggression of a bear. This was different. This was recognition. A jolt of pure, undiluted fear shot through my system. It was so visceral, it was almost sound, a high-pitched ringing in my ears that drowned out the truck's engine. My body moved before my brain did. My left hand, which had been dangling out the window, snapped back inside like it had been burned. My right hand fumbled for the window crank. My fingers felt numb and clumsy. I remember the cold, hard metal of the crank, the squeaky, grinding sound it made as I spun it, the glass slowly, agonizingly slowly, rising up the frame. I couldn't take my eyes off the thing. I was terrified that if I looked away, even for a second, it would be at the window. It didn't move. It just stood there, a monstrous silhouette against the dark green of the pines, perfectly still. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, ending in what looked like heavy, dark hands. The fur wasn't shaggy like a bear's. It was shorter, matted, like the coat of a bison. The silence was the worst part. It didn't make a sound, no growl, no huff, no rustle of leaves, just this immense, silent scrutiny. "Go," I said. My voice was a dry croak, barely audible. My cousin, who had been looking left down the other road, snapped his head toward me. He saw my face. He saw the window I was frantically cranking. He didn't ask questions. He stomped on the gas. The tires spun in the gravel for a heart-stopping second, spitting rocks and dirt, then caught. The truck lurched forward, the engine roaring as he slammed it into second gear. I was thrown back against the seat, my head whipping around, my eyes glued to the side mirror. The thing was still there, standing in the middle of that dirt road, already shrinking with our speed, but still watching us. It didn't chase. It didn't run. It just stood, a dark sentinel marking the place where the world stopped making sense. We must have driven a half-mile down that road before either of us spoke. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands were shaking. I clenched them into fists to try and make it stop, but it was no use. The adrenaline was like a fire in my veins. My cousin finally broke the silence, his voice tight. "What the hell was that?" I just shook my head, still staring straight ahead at the winding road, my knuckles white where I was gripping the dashboard. "You saw it too?" I managed to ask. "I saw something," he said, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. "When you freaked out and rolled up the window, I looked. I saw it standing there." "Jesus, what was it?" "It was on all fours first," I said, the words tumbling out. "It was big, like a big dog or something, but then it just stood up. It just stood straight up, man, in like a second." He was quiet for a long moment, both hands gripping the wheel now. The truck was still going way too fast for the road, bouncing violently over ruts. "It wasn't a bear," he said, more to himself than to me. "Bears don't stand up that fast, and they don't look like that." "No," I agreed, my voice hollow. "They don't." We drove for another 10 minutes in silence, the tension in the cab so thick you could taste it. The familiar woods outside the windows no longer looked friendly. Every shadow between the trees seemed to hold a shape. Every stump looked like a crouching figure. The warm evening air coming through the vents felt cold now. Finally, he pulled over onto a wide spot in the road, put the truck in park, and killed the engine. The sudden quiet was deafening. We could hear the crickets starting up, the distant call of a bird, normal sounds, but nothing felt normal anymore. He turned to me, his face pale. "It looked right at us," he said, and it wasn't a question. "Yeah, it did. I felt it," he whispered. "I was looking the other way, and then I felt watched like a pressure, and then I turned and saw you, and then I saw it." He ran a hand through his hair, its eyes. They were aware. That was the word. Aware. It wasn't the blank stare of an animal. It was a knowing look. It was assessing us, the truck, the situation. The intelligence in that gaze was the most horrifying part of the whole thing. An animal you can predict. You can understand its motivations. Food, fear, territory. This was something else. We sat there for a long time, going over it again and again, trying to find a rational explanation. A person in a fursuit? Out here, in the middle of nowhere at a random intersection. Why? And no one moves like that. The transformation from 4 legs to 2 was instantaneous, powerful, like a spring uncoiling. It was a physical impossibility for a human. A moose, wrong shape, Wrong color and moose don't stand upright and stare you down. A sick bear? Maybe, but sick animals don't move with that kind of explosive, coordinated power and the height. We both agreed on the height. It was taller than the roof of the pickup would have been. It was a giant. We talked until the last of the light faded from the sky and the woods became a solid wall of black. We had to drive home. Turning the truck around and going back the way we came wasn't even an option. We took the long way, a 20-mile detour on paved roads, with the windows up and the doors locked, which felt stupid but was absolutely necessary. The shared fear is what cemented it. It's one thing to see something bizarre and wonder if you're losing your mind. It's another thing entirely to have someone else see the exact same impossible thing, to feel the same primal terror, to have your own fear reflected back at you in their eyes. We didn't say the word. We didn't say Bigfoot. It felt too silly, too cliché, like we'd be trivializing what had happened, but it hung there in the air between us, unspoken. That was years ago. We still go deer hunting. We still drive those back roads, but we don't go to that particular intersection anymore. We both know where it is. We could find it on a map with a pin, but we've made a silent, mutual agreement to avoid it. I've never seen it again, and part of me is desperately grateful for that. But another part, a smaller, colder part, is still out there on that warm evening, frozen in that moment at the crossroads, cranking up a window while a giant brown bipedal thing with ancient eyes watches me flee. The memory of its stance, the sheer vertical dominance of it, and the chilling intelligence in its gaze, that's what never left me. It's what keeps me from rolling my window all the way down on a warm night, even now. Story 12. It was one of those late August days that makes you forget how harsh the winters can get here. The 30th of August, 1818. I remember the date because it's seared into my mind, right next to the image of the thing I saw. The air was warm, but there was a bite to it coming off Lake Ontario, a promise that autumn wasn't far off. I was out checking my trap lines a few miles east of Sackett's Harbor, in the deep woods that run toward Ellisburg. It's quiet country out there, the kind of quiet that sits heavy on your ears. You get used to the normal sounds, the scrabble of a squirrel, the cry of a hawk, the wind moving through the pines. But that day, the woods had gone still, profoundly still. I remember noting it, a little knot of unease tightening in my gut, but I shrugged it off. I've been a woodsman my whole life. You learn not to let the quiet spook you. I was bent over, my fingers working at the rusty jaw of an old leg-hold trap I'd set for fox, my mind on nothing more than the task and the walk back home. The smell of damp earth and pine resin was strong. I could feel the grit under my fingernails, the slight ache in my lower back from being crouched so long. That's when I heard it. Not a loud sound, but a wrong one. A heavy, snapping crunch, like a thick branch being broken not by the wind, but by something putting its full weight on it. I froze, my head coming up slow. My heart, which had been beating a steady, lazy rhythm, suddenly kicked like a mule against my ribs. I was in a small clearing ringed by thick hemlock and birch. The sun was dappling through the leaves, making the shadows dance, and that's when I saw it, maybe 10, 12 rods away from me. It emerged from the tree line, not with a stealthy creep, but with a suddenness that stole the air from my lungs. It was an animal, but like no animal God ever intended to walk this earth. The stories call it a wild man of the woods, and that's the only words I have for it, but words fail. It was tall, well over 7 feet, and covered in a shaggy, matted coat of hair that was a dirty, dark brown, almost black in the deep shadows of the woods. It wasn't standing straight up like a man, but was bent forward at the waist, its long, powerful arms hanging past its knees. It was just there, solid. Real, for a long second, maybe 2, it didn't move. It just stood at the edge of the trees and looked at me. I could feel its gaze. It wasn't the dumb, curious stare of a deer or the predatory focus of a wolf. This was something else, something intelligent. My eyes, wide with a terror so pure it felt like ice water in my veins, took in every detail. The hair on its face was shorter, pressed close to the skin, and I could see the heavy brow ridge shadowing its eyes. But it was the feet that sent a chill straight down my spine, a cold tremor that locked my joints. Its heels were narrow, but its feet spread out wide at the toes, splayed and powerful looking, like it was made for gripping the earth. It was a detail so bizarre, so unnatural, that my mind simply refused to process it for a moment. Then it moved. It didn't snarl or roar, it just turned its head a fraction. And then it took flight. Not like a bird, but with a run that was both impossibly fast and utterly silent. It didn't crash through the undergrowth. It flowed through it. Its body, that bent-over, hulking form, became a study of raw, efficient power. Its legs drove it forward in great, loping strides that ate up the ground, its long arms pumping in a rhythm that was almost graceful. I got a perfect view of its back as it ran, the muscles bunching and rolling under that thick pelt, and then it was gone, vanishing back into the deep timber as if it had never been. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was crouched there by my trap, my hands still frozen in mid-air, my breath caught in my throat. The silence rushed back in, but it was a different silence now. It was a listening silence, a waiting one. The air felt thick, charged. The warmth of the day was gone, replaced by a cold sweat that plastered my shirt to my back. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my temples. I stayed like that for what felt like an hour, my ears straining for any sound, my eyes scanning the tree line where it had disappeared, expecting it to reappear at any second. Slowly, feeling like an old man, I pushed myself to my feet. My legs were trembling so badly I had to brace a hand against a tree trunk. The rough bark felt real, solid, an anchor in a world that had just tilted off its axis. I looked down at the trap. It was just a piece of metal. The world was still the same world, but I wasn't the same man. I had seen something that shouldn't be. I left my gear. I didn't care about the traps, the line, any of it. I turned and I started walking back towards Sackett's Harbor. At first it was a walk, then a fast walk, and then I was running, crashing through the brush like a spooked animal myself, not caring about the noise, only caring about putting distance between me and that clearing. Every shadow was a threat. Every rustle of leaves was it coming back for me. The image of it, that hairy bent form and those splayed, horrible feet, was burned onto the back of my eyelids. I'd close my eyes for a blink and see it there, staring back at me. It took me the better part of the afternoon to get back to the outskirts of town. By the time I reached the first cabins, I was breathless, covered in sweat and scrapes, my face pale. People saw me coming and knew something was wrong. I've never been one for dramatics. I'm known as a steady man, a man of unquestionable veracity, as the lawyers like to say. So when I stumbled into the tavern, my voice shaking, and started talking about a wild man, a monster in the woods, they listened. The story spread faster than a fire in dry grass. Within hours, there was a crowd gathered, men with grim, determined faces, hunters with their long rifles, curious boys and frightened women. I must have told the story a dozen times, my words tumbling out, describing the height, the hair, the way it ran. Each time I said it out loud, it sounded more impossible, and yet the memory of it was so vivid, so physically real, that I knew I wasn't mad. I described the narrow heels spreading at the toes to a group of men, and one of them, an old trapper named Higgins, went pale and just nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed a fear he'd carried his whole life. By nightfall, a party had been organized, not a small one, dozens of men. Then more came from Ellisburg and the surrounding farms. In the end, there must have been hundreds of us. It was a strange, feverish time. We carried torches that threw crazy, dancing shadows against the trees, making the familiar woods look like a foreign and menacing place. The smell of pine smoke and sweat was everywhere. Shouts and calls echoed through the night, a chaotic symphony of human pursuit. For 2 days, we combed those woods. We beat through thickets, followed creek beds, climbed ridges. We found nothing. No tracks, no hair caught on a branch, no bed of crushed leaves, nothing. It was as if the earth had opened up and swallowed the creature whole. The fervor, that collective energy born of fear and excitement, began to drain away, replaced by a weary frustration. Men started to mutter. They'd look at me with questions in their eyes that they were too polite to ask out loud. Had I seen a bear, a large Indian perhaps, covered in furs? The heat and the shadows can play tricks on a man's mind. I stuck to my story. I knew what I saw, but with every empty hour, every fruitless search, the solid certainty of my memory began to feel more fragile. The natural improbability of the beast, as the educated men in town later called it, started to press in on me. How could such a thing exist and leave no trace? How could it vanish so completely? By the 3rd day, the search was called off. The men went back to their farms, their shops, their lives. The talk died down. It became a curiosity, a tall tale for the tavern. For me, it never ended. The end of the search wasn't the end of the story for me. It was the beginning of a different kind of haunting. I never saw it again. No one else ever came forward to say they saw it. The story remains unverified, a single solitary account. But those frequent and positive accounts from other parts of the country, the stories from other woodsmen in distant mountains, they've always stuck with me. They induced a belief, not in the others, but in me. They made me believe that I hadn't lost my mind, that there are things in the deep old woods that we don't understand, things that watch us from the shadows and know our forests better than we ever will. I still live here in Sackett's Harbor. I still go into the woods, though I never go as deep, and I never go alone, and I never, ever set a trap in that particular clearing again. The fear has faded from a sharp, stabbing terror to a low, constant hum of dread, a background noise to my life. But the memory hasn't faded. It's as clear today as it was on that 30th of August. The way the light fell, the smell of the pines, the profound silence, and the way it stood there, looking at me, a thing of impossible flesh and hair and bone, before it turned and ran with a grace that defied its size, leaving me alone in the woods with a mystery that has followed me every day of my life since. I can still see its feet, those narrow heels, spreading out at the toes. I'll see them until the day I die. Issue, Story 13. Okay, I'm just going to type this out. I don't know if anyone will believe me. And honestly, I don't even care if you do. I just need to get it out there, to put it into words, so maybe it'll feel a little less like a fever dream that's been haunting me for the past however many hours it's been. My hands are still shaking a little as I type this, so forgive me if I make some typos. It was yesterday. Just yesterday. It feels like a week ago, and also 5 minutes ago, all at the same time. I live in Crawford County, Indiana, not far from the little town of Bristow. It's quiet out here. You know the kind of quiet I mean. It's not just an absence of noise. It's a thick, heavy kind of quiet, especially once the sun goes down. The woods just swallow everything up. I've lived here my whole life. I know these woods, these back roads, these old creek beds like the back of my hand. My dad taught me how to hunt in them. He was a minister, but he was also a hunter to his core, a man who respected the woods and never ever spooked easy. He's the reason I started paying attention to all the stories in the first place, the ones that started popping up around 1978. You'd hear things. A young couple seeing something big and upright on the road at night. The local paper even ran a story about it once. There were hair samples and plaster casts sent off to Indiana University, but nothing ever came of it publicly. Just silence. And over the years, I'd collect accounts. A guy from my church told me how, when he was a kid playing hide and seek in a cornfield at night, he came face to face with something that scared him so bad he never went back into a cornfield after dark. A co-worker of mine swore he saw one in broad daylight, just loping across a firebreak near his cabin. And then there was my dad. His story was the one that got me. He was squirrel hunting near Poker Lake, right in that area where Crawford, Orange and Dubois counties all sort of bump into each other. He saw what he thought were legs, just legs, standing straight up behind a tree across a slough. He was a stickler for gun safety, never pointed his rifle at anything he didn't intend to shoot, but this made him raise it, just to see through the scope, to get a clearer view. And the second he did, the figure moved. It walked away on 2 feet, and then it stopped, like it knew it was being watched. It turned, not towards him, but toward the lake, and just walked into the trees and was gone. The terror for him, he told me later, wasn't in the seeing, but in the realizing. The moment his brain caught up with his eyes and he understood what he was looking at, he jogged all the way back to the check station, pale and breathing hard. And he looked me dead in the eye and told me, "Son, if you're going out there, you carry the .308, not the .22, not the varmint rifle, the .308. That was all I needed to hear. The man didn't have a dramatic bone in his body. If he said he saw it, so I believed. I believed something was out there in the Hoosier National Forest, something big that knew how to stay hidden. Yesterday, I decided to go out to that same general area near Poker Lake, not to hunt, just to look. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe some weird sign, something to corroborate all the stories. It was a stupid idea, I know that now. It was around 3 in the afternoon. The sky was that flat, grey-white color it gets in late fall. No sun, just a dull light that makes everything look the same shade of bleak. I parked my truck on a gravel pull-off off one of the old logging roads, the kind that doesn't really have a name, just a number on a forestry service map. I got out and just stood there for a minute listening, that heavy quiet. The air was cool and damp, smelled of rotting leaves and wet earth. I had my dad's old .308 with me, slung over my shoulder. It felt heavy and reassuring. I started walking, not really following a trail, just picking my way through the trees. The forest is different out there. It's not the tidy, managed woods you see near the hiking trails. It's dense, tangles of undergrowth, fallen logs covered in thick moss, ravines that appear out of nowhere. I walked for maybe 45 minutes, my boots crunching on the dry beech leaves. It was so normal, just a walk in the woods. I remember thinking how silly it all was, how my dad's story had probably just been a trick of the light, a bear standing up on its hind legs for a second. I was almost ready to turn back, to call it a day and go home and feel foolish. That's when I heard the first branch break. It wasn't a small twig snap. It was a loud, sharp crack, like a thick dead limb getting stepped on. It came from my left, down in a thicket of young pawpaw trees and brambles. I froze. My heart, which had been beating nice and slow, just slammed into my ribs. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded my system. Every hunter knows that sound. It's a big sound. A deer can move through the woods like a ghost. This was not a deer. I stood there, not breathing, straining to hear anything else. Nothing. Just that oppressive silence again, but now it felt different. It felt like a held breath. I slowly, so slowly, unslung the .308 from my shoulder, my fingers feeling clumsy and thick. I didn't chamber around. I just held it, my thumb on the safety. My mouth had gone completely dry. I waited for what felt like 5 minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then I heard a rustle. It was a slow, deliberate rustling, like something big was moving through the dry leaves, but not in a hurry. It was taking its time. The sound was moving. Not towards me, but parallel to me, keeping the same distance. I tried to peer into the thicket, but it was a wall of brown and grey, impossible to see more than 10 feet into. I started walking again, my steps careful and quiet. I wasn't trying to follow the sound. I was trying to get away from it, to angle back towards my truck. But every time I moved, the rustling moved with me. It was keeping pace. A cold trickle of sweat ran down my spine under my flannel shirt. This wasn't an animal going about its business. This was coordinated. It was aware of me. I picked up my pace a little, my heart hammering now. The rustling picked up its pace to match. I stopped dead. The rustling stopped. The silence rushed back in, louder than any sound. That's when the fear really set in. Not the jump scare kind of fear, but a deep, cold, sinking dread. This thing wasn't just near me, it was interacting with me. I decided to change direction, to cut straight up a small ridge, thinking I could get a vantage point. The ground was steep and covered in loose shale, and I had to use my free hand to grab onto saplings to pull myself up. I was making a racket and I didn't care anymore. I just wanted to see. I scrambled to the top, my lungs burning, and turned around, raising the rifle and looking back down the way I'd come, scanning the thicket through the iron sights. Nothing, just the still grey woods. I stood there, panting, scanning back and forth. Nothing moved. The feeling of being watched was so intense, it was like a physical pressure on my skin. I felt exposed on top of that ridge. I needed to get back to the truck. Now, I started half jogging, no longer trying to be quiet. I was just moving, crashing through the undergrowth. My only thought was to put distance between me and that presence. I'd run for a minute, then stop and listen. I'd hear nothing for a few seconds. And then, just as I was about to start running again, I'd hear it, a single, heavy thump off to my side, or the sound of a tree trunk creaking, like something heavy was leaning against it. It was herding me. I know how that sounds, but I'm telling you, that's what it felt like. It wasn't chasing me, it was guiding me, pushing me along a specific path. I was so turned around, my sense of direction completely shot by the panic. All I knew was that I was going downhill, which was generally the right way towards the road. I broke out of the thick woods into a more open area, a long, sloping field of tall, dead grass that ran down to a creek. I could see the roof of my truck, a tiny, distant speck of white through the bare trees on the other side of the creek. Relief washed over me so powerfully my knees almost buckled. I was almost there, just down this field, across the creek and up the other side. I started down the slope, the dead grass whipping against my jeans. I was maybe halfway down when I heard it behind me. It wasn't a rustle or a snap. It was a sound I have never heard before in my life and hope to never hear again. It was a low, guttural... I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't a growl. It was deeper than that, more resonant. It was like a hum and a grunt mixed together. But it had a weird, almost wooden quality to it, like someone hitting a hollow log with a giant mallet. And it was loud. It vibrated in my chest. I froze, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. I didn't want to turn around. I did not want to see what was making that sound, but I had to. I slowly, so slowly it felt like my joints were rusted shut, turned my head to look over my shoulder. At the tree line, at the top of the field where I had just come from, stood a figure. It was tall, so much taller than a man. It had to be 8 feet, easy. It was built thick like a power lifter, covered in dark, matted hair that was almost black. It was just standing there, perfectly still, watching me. I couldn't see its face clearly from that distance, just a dark shape under its shoulders, but I could feel its eyes on me. The feeling was pure, undiluted menace. This wasn't a curious animal, this was a predator, and I was in its space. The sound came again, that low, hollow grunt. It wasn't directed at the sky or the trees, it was directed right at me. That broke the spell. I spun around and I ran. I didn't jog, I didn't trot. I ran for my life. I sprinted down that hill, my legs pumping, my breath coming in ragged, sobbing gasps. I didn't look back, I couldn't. I hit the creek bank and didn't even break stride, just plunged into the icy, knee-deep water, scrambling up the other side, soaking wet and covered in mud. I heard one more sound from behind me. It wasn't the grunt. It was a series of quick, heavy, thumping footsteps, like it had taken a few running steps down the hill after me. But then they stopped. I didn't stop. I clawed my way up the far bank, through the last line of trees, and stumbled out onto the gravel road. My truck was right there. I fumbled for the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. I threw the rifle onto the passenger seat, scrambled in, and slammed the door shut, hitting the lock button over and over again. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my entire body trembling uncontrollably. I was hyperventilating. I forced myself to look out the windshield, back across the creek, up to the tree line at the top of the field. It was gone. The field was empty. The woods were silent. I started the truck and peeled out, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't slow down until I was on the main paved road, my knuckles white on the wheel. I got home, locked all the doors, and just sat in my living room in the dark for hours. I still haven't slept. Every time I close my eyes, I see it, standing there at the tree line. I hear that sound. My dad's words kept echoing in my head. The terror was the realization. I finally understood what he meant. It's the moment your brain accepts that the world is not what you thought it was, that the rules you've lived by your whole life don't apply in those deep woods, that there are things living in the shadows of the Hoosier National Forest that we aren't supposed to see. And the worst part, the thing that keeps my stomach in a knot, is the certainty that it let me go. It herded me to the edge of its territory, and then it showed itself, just for a second, just to make sure I knew. It wanted me to see it, and then it let me run. I don't know why. I'll probably never know why, but I know I'm never going back out there. And that .308 is staying by my door, loaded from now on. Story 14. My place is a small, single-story house. It's old, the kind with real wood siding that creaks when the wind blows, and it sits at the end of a long gravel driveway that cuts through a thick patch of woods. My neighbors are a good quarter-mile away, and their lights are just specks through the trees. I liked the privacy. I liked the quiet. Or I thought I did. That night, I was deep into a session. It was well after midnight, probably pushing one in the morning. My desk is right there in the living room, positioned so my back is to the big picture window that looks out into the backyard, and I'm facing the wall where the front door is. The front door has this stupid, narrow little window next to it, like a vertical slit, maybe 4 inches wide and 1.5 feet tall. It's useless for seeing anything except a sliver of the front porch and the first step or two into the yard. My bladder was about to burst. I'd been chugging soda for hours, trying to stay awake, and I finally had to cave. I told the guys on my headset I was taking a bio break, ripped the headset off, and pushed my chair back. The game sounds were still blaring from my speakers, gunfire and explosions and all that, so the room was anything but quiet. As I stood up, I turned toward the hallway that leads to the bathroom and my bedroom. To get there, I had to pass the front door. It was just a reflex, a dumb habit. I glanced out that stupid little narrow window and I stopped dead. My brain just stuttered. It couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. There was something standing on my porch. It wasn't a person. I need to be absolutely clear about that from the start. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a guy in a costume. It was a solid, well-defined figure, and it was covered in hair. Dark hair. It looked black in the shadows of the porch, but the faint glow from the security light I have mounted on the garage, way across the driveway, caught it just enough to show it was a deep, matted brown, like old, wet bark. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, And this thing had to be at least 8 feet, maybe more. It was standing hunched over, its head bent forward, and it was peering in through that little window, right at me. The most fucked up part, the part that still makes my skin feel 2 sizes too small, was that it had no neck. Its head just seemed to sit directly on its massive shoulders, and its arms. God, its arms were so long. They hung down past its knees, and they were thick like tree limbs. They just dangled there, ending in these dark, indistinct hands. It was completely still. Not a twitch. It was just there. A solid mass of something that should not exist, looking in through a window that was only 4 inches wide, like it was focusing its entire being into that one narrow slit to see inside my house. The fear didn't hit me all at once. It was a slow, cold seep, like ice water filling up my veins. First, it was just confusion. A literal, what the hell is that? Then my brain started throwing out rationalizations. A shadow. No, it was 3-dimensional, solid condensation on the glass. It was clear as day. A trick of the light. The porch light wasn't on. The only light was from 30 feet away. This thing was real. It was flesh and hair and mass standing on my goddamn front porch. That's when the cold seep turned into a full-blown avalanche of pure, undiluted terror. It was a deep, primal fear, the kind you read about but never actually feel, the kind that comes from a place in your brain that remembers being prey. My heart wasn't just pounding, it was trying to hammer its way out of my chest. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second I thought I was going to pass out. My legs felt like water. I couldn't move. We just stared at each other, or I stared at it. Its eyes. I couldn't see its eyes clearly. They were just dark pools in a face that was mostly a heavy brow ridge and a pushed-in snout. But I felt its gaze. I felt it looking right into me. There was an intelligence there, a cold, calculating awareness that this was not some dumb animal. It knew it was looking into a house. It knew it was looking at a person. The thought that finally broke my paralysis was my phone, my camera. I had to get a picture. No one would ever believe me. I wouldn't believe me. I needed proof. I took a stumbling step backward, my eyes locked on the window. The thing didn't move. It just kept staring. I fumbled on my desk, my hands shaking so bad I could barely control them. I knocked over a can of soda, the sticky liquid spreading across my mouse pad. But I didn't care. My phone was right there next to my keyboard. I snatched it up, my thumb smearing across the screen, trying to swipe it open. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 2 or 3 seconds. I got the camera app open, my finger hovering over the shutter button. I forced myself to look up from the screen, to frame the shot through that narrow window. The porch was empty. Just like that. It was gone. The view through the slit was just the dark wood of the porch railing and the night beyond. No massive, hairy figure. No dark, peering face. For a second, I felt a crazy, stupid sense of relief, followed immediately by a worse, more confused fear. Where did it go? It couldn't have just vanished. It was too big, too solid. My first instinct was to run to the door and lock it. I slammed my thumb down on the deadbolt, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. I'd taken my headset off, and in my panic I must have muted the game or something, because the room was silent now, eerily silent. I stood there, my back pressed against the door, listening. I couldn't hear anything. No footsteps on the porch, no cracking of twigs in the yard, nothing. This is the part where, in a movie, the idiot goes outside with a flashlight. I'm not gonna lie, I thought about it. The army trained me for a lot of things. I did a tour overseas. I've been in stressful situations, but this was different. This wasn't a known threat. This was the unknown staring you in the face. And every fiber of my being was screaming at me to hide. But the need to know, to prove I wasn't going insane, was stronger. I inched over to the narrow window and pressed my face against the glass, cupping my hands around my eyes to block out the room's light. I scanned the porch. Nothing. The old wooden swing was still. The potted plant my mum gave me was untouched. I looked out into the yard, toward the tree line. The security light cast long, dancing shadows, but none of them moved with purpose. None of them were 8 feet tall. My heart was still going 1,000,000 miles an hour. I had to see more. I had to be sure. I reached for the switch for the porch light. My hand was trembling. I flicked it on. The sudden burst of yellow light made me jump. It illuminated the whole porch, the steps, the first 10 feet of the gravel driveway. It was blinding after the darkness. I squinted, scanning every inch. Nothing, no sign of it. No disturbed gravel, no footprints on the dusty porch boards. How could something that big and heavy not leave a trace? The bravest and probably dumbest thing I did all night was unlock the deadbolt. The click was deafening. I turned the knob and pulled the door open just a crack, maybe 6 inches. The cold night air rushed in, smelling of pine and damp earth. I stuck my head out, my body still safely inside the house. I looked left, down the porch. Nothing. I looked right. Nothing. The woods at the edge of the yard were a wall of blackness. The silence was absolute. No crickets, no frogs, no rustle of leaves. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. I pulled my head back in and shut the door, locking it again, double-checking the bolt. I stood there for a minute, just breathing, trying to get a grip. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was sleep deprivation, a hallucination. My mind was desperately trying to claw its way back to a sane, normal world. That's when I remembered why I'd gotten up in the first place. My bladder was still screaming at me. The fear had just overridden everything else. Now, the physical need came rushing back. The bathroom is down the short hallway, past my bedroom door. It felt like a mile-long journey. I didn't turn on the hall light. I didn't want to ruin my night vision, and part of me was terrified of what the light might reveal. I walked quickly, my socks silent on the hardwood floor, my ears straining for any sound. I did my business in the dark, barely even looking, just wanting to get back to the relative safety of the lit living room. I flushed the toilet, and the sound was like a gunshot in the quiet house. I washed my hands with cold water, splashing some on my face, trying to shock myself back to normalcy. As I was drying my hands on my pants, I heard it. It wasn't a sound from outside. It wasn't the house settling. This was different. It started as a low rumble, so deep I felt it more than heard it, a vibration that came up through the floorboards and into the soles of my feet. It built for a second, then erupted into a short, explosive burst. It sounded like thunder, but not from the sky. It was close, right outside, but it was a clear night. There were no storms. The rumble came again, another one. Ha! Roar! It was guttural, powerful, full of a bass that shook my ribs. It wasn't a scream or a howl, it was a vocalization, a deep, rumbling call that was meant to be heard and felt over a long distance. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that it was coming from the thing. It was out there, in the woods just beyond my yard, and it was making that sound. The most terrifying part. The house was silent. The game was still quiet. There were no other sounds to mask it, but as that second rumble faded, I realized something else. I couldn't hear the normal nighttime sounds anymore. The silence that had fallen when I first saw it had returned, deeper than ever. It was as if that sound had commanded everything else to be quiet. I stood frozen in the dark bathroom, my hand still on the towel, my blood running cold. I wasn't breathing. I was just listening, waiting for another one. It never came. The silence stretched on, becoming a presence in itself, a heavy, waiting silence. I finally forced myself to move, creeping back to the living room. I didn't turn on any more lights. I sat down in my desk chair, my back to the big picture window, and I just stared at the front door. I sat there for the rest of the night, until the sky started to turn grey with the dawn. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I just watched that narrow window, waiting for a dark shape to fill it again. It never did. I've turned that night over in my head 1,000 times. I was in the army. I've been to deserts and mountains on the other side of the world. I've seen a lot of weird shit on the internet. I've never seen or heard anything that even comes close to what was on my porch that night. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person. It was something else. Something that shouldn't be. And the worst part, the part that keeps me up at night now, isn't just the memory of it staring at me. It's the sound of those deep, rumbling bursts in the silent dark. A sound that only I heard. And the gut-level knowledge that whatever made that sound was letting me know it was still out there. Story 15. We had 2 dogs, mutts really, named Buster and Lady. They were usually pretty calm, but that day their barking was different. It wasn't the usual yapping when a squirrel ran by or the mailman came. This was frantic, like they were scared or angry, a high-pitched, continuous bark that made the hair on my arms stand up. I remember feeling a knot in my stomach right away because it was so out of the ordinary. I yelled from the front door, "Hey, what's going on out there?" But of course they didn't stop. My mum wasn't home. She'd gone to the store, and my older brother David was in his room, probably listening to music or something. So it was just me, and I knew I had to check it out. I walked through the house to the back door, which led out to a screened-in porch. From there I could see the backyard. We had a big yard, mostly grass with some trees at the edge that led into a thick forest. The dogs were in a pen we'd built for them, a fenced-in area with chicken wire and posts so they could run around but not wander off. As soon as I stepped onto the porch, I saw it. At first I thought it was a bear or something because we'd had bears around before. But this was different. It was large, really large, and black, but not like a bear's fur. It was more like a dark, matted color, and it was hunched over, pulling on the wire of the dog pen with its hands. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I froze for a second, just staring. The dogs were going nuts, barking and growling, but the thing didn't seem to care. It was strong. I could hear the wire creaking and snapping as it tugged on it. I remember thinking, "What the hell is that?" But I didn't say it out loud. I was too scared to make a sound. Then I took a step closer, pushing the screen door open slowly, trying not to attract attention. The air outside was thick with the smell of pine and damp earth, but there was another smell too, something musky and foul, like a goat or something. I didn't realize it then, but that was coming from it. As I moved into the yard, I got a better look. The thing was huge, at least 8 feet tall, and it wasn't a bear. Its head was bald, no hair at all, just thick, brownish skin that looked rough, almost like leather. It had big, round eyes that were dark and shiny, and when it turned its head slightly, I saw its teeth. They were block-shaped, like little cubes, and it was grunting low and deep, a sound that made my skin crawl. The dogs were whining now, backing away from the fence, and I felt this surge of protectiveness. I had to do something. I don't know what came over me, but I screamed, just a loud, sharp scream, like I was trying to scare it off. The second I did, the thing stopped pulling on the wire and snapped its head toward me. That's when the real terror hit. It turned its whole body to face me, and I saw it clearly for the first time. It was male. I could tell from the build, broad shoulders and a muscular frame. But it wasn't human. The eyes locked onto mine, and they were so big and dark, I felt like I was falling into them. The smell hit me full force then, that goat-like stink, strong and pungent, like a barnyard mixed with something rotten. It grunted again, a guttural sound that seemed to vibrate in the air. And then it took off, running toward the forest in long, powerful strides. I stood there, frozen, for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. My legs felt like jelly, and I could hear my own breathing, ragged and fast. Then I turned and ran back toward the house, my feet slipping on the damp grass. I burst through the screen door, slamming it behind me, and leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold them still. That's when David came out of his room, probably hearing the commotion. He asked me what was wrong, and I just pointed toward the backyard, my voice trembling as I tried to explain. He didn't believe me at first, thought I was messing around or had seen a bear. But he went to the window and looked out, and that's when he saw it too. The thing was still visible at the edge of the forest, standing there, just watching the house. David's face went pale, and he grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the door. We both stood there, staring out the window, too scared to move. The dogs had quieted down, but they were still whimpering, huddled together in the pen. We could see the thing clearly now. It was just standing there, not moving, like it was waiting for something. The rest of the day is a blur. We didn't leave the house until our mom got home, and even then we didn't tell her everything right away. David and I were both shaken, and we spent the rest of the afternoon sitting in the living room, jumping at every little sound. We kept looking out the windows, half expecting to see it again, but it was gone. The memory of those eyes, that smell, it stuck with me. To this day, I can't explain what it was, but I know what I saw, and David saw it too. We never talked about it much after that, but whenever I think back, I get that same chill, like it's still out there watching. Story 16. Okay, I'll try to write this out the way it's still stuck in my head. I don't tell people about this much because they look at you like you're crazy, or they get all excited and ask a bunch of questions I can't answer, but it happened. I know what I saw. It was November of 1995. I remember because it was the last weekend of bow season, and I hadn't had any luck. I was getting desperate. I'd taken the Friday off work, driven out to my usual spot in the woods outside of Colleton, Oregon. It's not far from Hunter Road, if you know the area. It's not deep, crazy wilderness, but it's thick. A lot of people don't realize how dense it gets just a few hundred yards off the road. That day, the air was cool and damp. Not quite raining, but everything was wet. The leaves were soggy underfoot, and the air had that cold, wet dirt smell. The kind that gets in your lungs and makes you feel the chill right in your bones. I'd been out since early afternoon, moving slow, trying to find a good spot. I settled in between two deer trails that cut through a nasty patch of blackberry bushes. It was a good spot. The thorns were a pain to get through, but once you were in, you were hidden. The deer would use the trails on either side, and if the wind was right, I'd have a clean shot. I got set up maybe around 3 in the afternoon. I remember the sky was already this flat, grey colour, the kind that doesn't give you any idea what time it is. I was wearing my old camouflage, sitting on a small, foldable stool I'd brought, my back against a big cedar tree. My bow was across my lap. It was quiet. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Normally, you hear things. Squirrels chattering, birds, the rustle of something small in the leaves, but not that day. It was just silent. Not a peaceful silence either. It was a heavy silence, the kind that feels like it's pressing down on your ears. I must have been sitting there for a couple of hours. The light was starting to go, that long, slow fade into dusk, where everything loses its color and just becomes shades of gray and blue. I was starting to think about packing it in. It was getting colder, and my fingers were stiff. I was just about to reach for my pack when I heard it. A crunch, not a small one, not a deer. This was a heavy, deliberate crunch through the wet leaves, like someone was taking a step and really putting their weight into it. I froze. My first thought was, another hunter, but it didn't sound right. Hunters try to be quiet. This wasn't trying to be quiet. It was slow, measured. Crunch, then a pause. Crunch. It was behind me. Maybe 30, 40 yards back, off to my left a little. My heart just started hammering in my chest. I didn't move a muscle. I just listened. Crunch. Pause. crunch. Each step sounded like it was sinking deep into the ground. It wasn't walking fast. It was cautious but heavy. Really, really heavy. I had to look. I knew I had to. I turned my head. So slowly it felt like my neck was cracking. I didn't turn my body, just my head, an inch at a time. I was looking back through the trees, into the gloom. The blackberry bushes were between me and whatever it was, so I couldn't see much, just trunks and shadows and thorns. Then it stepped into a small clearing. I stopped breathing. It was massive. I'm not talking about a big guy. I'm talking about something that shouldn't exist. It had to be over 7.5 feet tall. Its shoulders were so wide, I'd guess 4 feet across. Easy. It was just this wall of muscle and hair. It was covered in this coarse black hair. It wasn't like a bear's fur, all even and sleek. This was uneven. Patches of it were longer, kind of shaggy, and in other spots it was shorter, almost matted down. It looked wet from the damp air. Its face, God, its face. It wasn't an ape, it wasn't a man. It was something in between. It had a broad, flat nose. Its eyes were deep set, sunk back under this heavy brow, so I couldn't really see them, just these dark pits. It had a jaw, a square, heavy jaw. It was just standing there, broadside to me, and I could see its chest moving. It was breathing deep and steady. I could hear it from where I was, a low rhythmic sound like a bellows. It stopped walking. It was just standing in the middle of this little clearing, maybe 50 feet from me, and then it turned its head. It turned directly toward me. It knew. I knew it knew. There was no question. It wasn't looking around. It was looking right at me, right through the screen of blackberry thorns. It knew exactly where I was sitting. My bow was in my lap. My hand was on the grip. I could have drawn an arrow, but I couldn't move. It wasn't just fear, though I was more terrified than I've ever been in my life. It was this understanding, this primal knowledge that if I moved, if I made any kind of aggressive gesture, that would be it. It would be on me. I felt like a mouse that's been spotted by an owl. You just freeze. You hope if you don't move, it'll think you're a rock. So we just stared at each other, or I stared at it, and it stared at the spot where I was hiding. It lasted for a minute, maybe more. It felt like an eternity. The whole time it was swaying, just slightly, a slow rhythmic sway from side to side. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and they swayed with its body. Its breathing was the only sound, that deep, steady in and out. No forest sounds, no wind, just its breathing and the pounding of my own heart in my ears. I could feel its presence. It's hard to explain. It was like a physical weight in the air, a pressure. I felt small, not just small, but insignificant, like I was in the presence of something that was so much more substantial than me. It felt old and intelligent. I know that sounds crazy, but you could see it in the way it held itself. It wasn't a dumb animal. It was assessing me. It was calm. It was completely, utterly calm. My mind was racing. What is it? What do I do? Is it going to charge? My muscles were screaming to run, but my brain was screaming back, don't you dare. I could smell it now too. A smell, musky, like wet dog, but stronger and mixed with something else, something earthy, like old leaves and dirt. Then, after what felt like a lifetime, it stopped swaying. It turned its head away from me, looking back the way it had come. It moved smoothly, not like a person turns with a little jerk. It was one fluid motion. Then it took a step and then another, and it walked away. It didn't crash through the brush, it didn't run. It just walked back into the thicker trees, and it didn't make a sound, not a single crunch, not a snapped twig. One moment it was there, this huge dark shape filling the clearing, and the next it was just gone. The woods swallowed it up without a trace. I didn't move. I sat there for I don't know how long, 10 minutes, 20. The darkness was really setting in. My legs had fallen asleep. I was shaking, not just a little shiver, but full body shakes like I was freezing cold. I finally forced myself to stand up. My knees were so weak I almost fell over. I grabbed my bow, fumbled with my pack, and I got out of there. I didn't care about being quiet. I just crashed through the woods, back toward my truck, my heart still trying to beat its way out of my chest. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see those deep-set eyes in the dark behind me. I got to my truck, threw my gear in the back, and just sat in the driver's seat for a while, breathing hard. I locked the doors. I drove home, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. The next morning, in the daylight, I felt like an idiot. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was just a bear standing on its hind legs, and the shadows had played tricks on me. I had to know. I drove back out there. The sun was out, and it looked like a completely different place. Normal. Birds were singing. I found the spot. My little stool impressions were still in the dirt. I looked where the clearing had been. The leaves were disturbed, not trampled, but pushed around like something big had been standing there. I saw a couple of small branches on a young fir tree that were bent, about 7 feet off the ground. But tracks. I looked everywhere. The ground was soft, perfect for holding a print, but there was nothing, no clear footprints, nothing that said Bigfoot was here, just a mess of wet leaves and those bent branches. That was almost 30 years ago. I've never gone bow hunting by myself in those woods again. I'll go with a buddy sometimes, but I stick close to the truck. I can't shake the feeling I got from that thing. It wasn't just fear. It was the intelligence in it, the way it looked at me. It wasn't angry. It wasn't curious even. It was just observing. It saw me. It decided I wasn't a threat. And it left. Its silent departure was somehow more terrifying than if it had charged. It meant it was completely in control the whole time. I still dream about it sometimes. That massive black shape in the grey twilight, swaying, just watching me, and the silence after it was gone. That's the part that really stays with me. The utter, complete silence. Story 17. It was one of those late afternoons where the light starts to fade early and everything gets quiet and still. My friend and I were up in the mountains, camping for the weekend. We'd set up camp a couple hours earlier, and by around 5 in the evening, we realized we were running low on firewood. The temperature was dropping fast, and we needed to gather more before it got completely dark. The sky was this dull grey, and a moderate fog had rolled in, making everything look hazy and kind of eerie. The ground was covered in about an inch of fresh snow from the night before, so everything was crisp and white, but the fog made it hard to see more than 50 feet ahead sometimes. We were maybe 200 to 300 yards from our camp, working our way along this slope that was dotted with pine trees and patches of deadfall. The air was so cold, it stung my lungs when I breathed in, and I could feel the dampness seeping through my gloves as I picked up sticks. My friend was a few yards away, humming some tune under his breath, and I remember feeling pretty relaxed at first. We'd been out here before, and it always felt safe, you know? Like the woods are quiet, but in a peaceful way. Not that day. I was bent over grabbing a decent-sized branch from a pile of deadfall when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or something, but then I straightened up and looked. And that's when I saw it, this large, hairy figure, easily 7 to 8 feet tall, running across in front of us. It was maybe 10 to 15 yards ahead, moving through a thicker patch of timber, and it stayed upright the whole time. It wasn't loping or stumbling like a bear would. It was running fast on 2 legs, almost like a person, but way bigger and more powerful. The way it moved was smooth, like it belonged there, and it covered about 40 yards in what felt like seconds before the fog swallowed it up. My heart just dropped. I froze, my hand still wrapped around that branch, and I couldn't even breathe for a second. I remember my mouth going dry and this cold sweat breaking out on my forehead despite the chill. I glanced over at my friend, and he was staring too, his eyes wide, like he'd seen the same thing. He didn't say anything at first, and neither did I. We just stood there, listening to the silence that felt heavier than before. The only sound was the faint crunch of snow under our boots as we shifted nervously. I knew instantly it wasn't a bear. I've seen bears before. They're big, but they don't move like that. This thing was tall and bulky, with dark hair that looked almost black against the snow, and it didn't have the hunched posture of a bear. It was upright, legs pumping, arms swinging slightly, and it vanished into the fog so fast it was like it never existed. But I saw it. I know I did. After a few seconds, my friend whispered, "Did you see that?" And his voice was shaky. I just nodded because I couldn't get words out. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. But the only thing that fit was a Sasquatch. I'd heard stories, but I never believed them. Not really. Until that moment. The terror hit me like a physical blow, and I felt this chill run down my spine, so intense it made me shudder. It was the realization that we weren't alone out here, and whatever that was, it was close. We dropped the wood we'd gathered and started backing away slowly, not wanting to make any sudden moves. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and every little sound, a twig snapping, the wind rustling the trees, made me jump. The fog seemed to thicken around us, like it was hiding something, and I kept scanning the trees, half expecting to see it again. My friend was breathing heavily, and I could see the fear in his eyes. He kept looking over his shoulder, and so did I. We didn't talk much on the way back to camp. What was there to say? We both knew what we'd seen, and it wasn't something you could easily dismiss. The walk felt twice as long as before, and every shadow in the trees seemed to move. I remember the snow crunching under our boots and the way the cold air bit at my face. But all I could think about was that figure, how fast it moved, how silent it was aside from the soft thuds of its steps, if it even made any. I don't recall hearing much, just the visual burned into my brain. When we got back to camp, we didn't even bother with the firewood at first. We just stood by the tent, trying to calm down. My hands were trembling, and I had to sit on a log to steady myself. The camp felt exposed suddenly, like we were being watched from the trees. The fog was still there, hanging low, and the light was fading fast, turning everything blue and grey. I kept peering into the woods, expecting to see those eyes or something, but there was nothing, just silence. We decided to build a fire anyway, more for the light and comfort than anything else. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being observed. Every time a branch cracked or the wind picked up, I'd freeze and look around. My friend was jumpy too, and we ended up sitting close to the fire, not saying much. The flames crackled and cast flickering shadows on the trees, which should have been comforting, but it just made me more anxious. Those shadows could hide anything. Then, as it got fully dark, maybe an hour or so after we got back, I heard it. A scream. Not like any animal I've ever heard. Not a screech owl, not a coyote, not an elk. This was different. It was extremely high-pitched, but it had this tremendous force behind it, like it was tearing through the air. It echoed off the canyon wall nearby, and the sound seemed to hang there, vibrating in my bones. I felt the hair on my neck stand up straight, and my blood ran cold. It was the most terrifying sound I've ever heard, and it came from the same direction where we'd seen that thing earlier. My friend heard it too. He looked at me, his face pale in the firelight, and we both knew. That scream cemented everything. It wasn't just a sighting, it was a warning, or maybe it was letting us know it was still there. We didn't say a word for a long time after that, just sat there, listening to the silence that followed, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing in on us. We packed up and left first thing the next morning. Didn't even bother with breakfast. I've been back to the woods since, but never to that spot, and I still can't explain what happened. Was it a Sasquatch? I don't know for sure, but I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. And that fear, it stuck with me, like a part of me is still out there in the snow, watching that figure disappear into the fog. Story 18. I live on a few acres in rural South Carolina. It's not deep, deep wilderness, but it's wooded, thick with pines and oaks, lots of underbrush. It's the kind of place you move to for the quiet. For 3 years, that quiet has been gone. It's been replaced by this feeling, a constant low-grade hum of anxiety that spikes every single night when the sun goes down. My kids don't play outside after dark anymore. They won't even go out to the porch. That's not how childhood should be. It didn't start with a bang. It started with a sound. One night, must have been a little over 3 years ago, I was taking the trash out to the big can we keep near the tree line. It was a regular night. Crickets were loud. The air was warm and damp, like it usually is here. I tossed the bag in, closed the lid, and was turning to go back inside when I heard it. It wasn't a deer. I know what a deer sounds like moving through the woods. This was different. This was a heavy, deliberate crunch, like something big was putting its full weight down with each step. Then another, and with each step there was this sickening snap of branches. Not little twigs, but proper branches, the kind that make you wince at the sound. It was walking parallel to the tree line, maybe 30, 40 feet into the woods. I couldn't see anything. It was just a wall of blackness past the little circle of light from the porch. I stood there frozen, my hand still on the trash can lid. My heart was just hammering against my ribs. It wasn't fear at first, not really. It was more like confusion, my brain trying and failing to match the sound to anything I knew. A bear, maybe. But the steps were too regular, too rhythmic. It sounded like something walking on 2 legs. The sound moved from my right to my left, and then it just stopped. The woods went silent. The crickets had even stopped. I stood there for another minute, maybe 2, just listening to the blood pounding in my ears. Then I practically ran back inside, locking the door behind me and checking it twice. I told myself it was a bear. I clung to that for a week or so. Then my kids started talking. My oldest, he was 7 at the time, came in from playing near the edge of the yard. He said he and his sister saw a hairy man watching them from between the trees. He said it was just standing there, not moving. My daughter, who was 5, just nodded, her eyes huge. She wouldn't say anything. Kids have imaginations, right? You hear about imaginary friends. This was an imaginary enemy. But the way they said it, it wasn't playful. It was scared. My son's voice was shaky. He said the man was big and dark, and it didn't have any clothes on. That got my attention. I went out to where they pointed, right at the spot where the pines are thickest. The ground was soft from a recent rain, and I saw them, footprints. They were huge. I wear a size 11 shoe, and I put my foot next to one of them. It was easily 5-6 inches longer than my boot, and wider, a lot wider. The shape was weird too, not like a bare human foot, but not quite like a bear's either. It was like this long, flat foot with splayed toes. The impression was deep. Whatever made it was heavy, really heavy. I felt my stomach just drop. That was the moment the bear theory started to feel flimsy. A bear doesn't leave a single line of footprints that look like that, and it sure as hell doesn't stand and watch kids from the trees. That's when the nightly stuff started, the tapping. It always happened after midnight once the house was quiet. It would start as a soft tap, tap, tap on the wall of the house. Not the door or the windows, but the exterior wall. Usually the one facing the woods. It wasn't a random noise, it was deliberate. It would tap a few times, stop for a minute, then start again somewhere else. It did a circuit around the whole house some nights. I'd lie in bed, my whole body tense, just listening. My wife would be asleep next to me, and I'd just be staring at the ceiling, counting the taps. If I got up and shone a flashlight out the window, it would stop, every time. Nothing there. Our dog, a big German shepherd named Duke, completely changed. He used to love going out at night. Now, when I'd open the door to let him out after dark, he'd just plant his feet. He wouldn't budge. He'd stand in the doorway, the hair on his back standing straight up, and he'd let out this low, rumbling growl that was nothing like his normal bark. He wasn't growling at anything specific in the yard. He was growling at the darkness, at the whole damn woods. He'd sometimes pee right there on the welcome mat because he refused to step out. That's when I knew it was bad. A dog knows. I started seeing things, just glimpses. I'd be out late locking up the chicken coop, and I'd swing my flashlight beam towards the trees. I'd catch a movement just on the edge of the light, a dark, hairy shape, massive, just slipping behind a tree trunk. It was always fast, so fast it was almost a blur, but it was there, and it was always upright. I never once saw it on all fours. The sheer size of it, it made me feel small. It made my house feel small. The worst part was the smell. On nights when the tapping was bad, or when Duke was especially agitated, this smell would drift in through the vents or under the doors. It was a musky, foul odor, like wet dog, but mixed with something else, something rotten, something dead. It was thick and heavy, and it made the air in the house feel dirty. We'd wake up to it sometimes, this awful stench that had seeped into everything. Then came the night I saw it clearly. The night everything changed. It was a Thursday. I remember because I'd been trying to fix the lawnmower all afternoon and had given up, leaving it by the tool shed. After dinner, I realized I'd left my good wrench out there. It was getting dark, but not full dark yet. That long, gloomy twilight. I grabbed a flashlight and headed out to the shed. The shed is about 50 yards from the house, right on the border where the lawn turns to woods. As I got closer, I had this feeling, that feeling you get when you know you're not alone. The back of my neck was prickling. I stopped about 10 feet from the shed door and shone my light around. Nothing. I took a step forward, and that's when I saw it. It was standing beside the shed, half in shadow. It wasn't moving. It was just watching me. My flashlight beam hit it full on. It was covered in dark, matted hair, like a gorilla's, but longer in places. It was huge. Its shoulders were impossibly broad and powerful looking, sloping down to long, thick arms that hung past its knees. It stood on 2 legs, fully upright. I couldn't see its face clearly. The shadows were too deep, but I got an impression of a heavy brow. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't even think. I just stood there frozen, with this beam of light shaking in my hand, illuminating this thing that wasn't supposed to exist. It didn't snarl. It didn't charge. It didn't even seem startled by the light. It just turned its head slightly, looked right at me for what felt like an eternity, and then it moved. It didn't run. It just took a step back into the deeper shadows behind the shed. It moved with this calm, fluid grace that was terrifying. It wasn't fleeing. It was just leaving. It was completely unthreatened by me. I was just a thing in its way. I heard its footsteps, those same heavy, branch-snapping steps from 3 years ago, recede into the woods, then silence. I don't know how long I stood there. My legs were trembling so hard I thought I'd fall over. I finally stumbled back to the house, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I didn't even get the wrench. I locked the door, checked on the kids, and sat in the kitchen with all the lights on, just shaking. That should have been the peak, but it wasn't. Later that same night, it started to rain, a steady, hard rain that drummed on the roof. We were all in the living room, trying to watch a movie, but the mood was tense. My youngest was sitting by the big window that looks out onto the front yard. Suddenly, she screamed, not a yell, but a full-blown, blood-curdling shriek of pure terror. I jumped up and ran to her. She was pointing at the window, crying hysterically. I looked out. The rain was coming down in sheets, making it hard to see. But I saw it. A large, dark, upright body moving away from the house. It was just a silhouette against the slightly lighter darkness of the yard, but it was massive, and it was walking on two legs, heading straight for the tree line. It was gone in 2 seconds. I held my daughter, trying to calm her down, my own heart going a mile a minute. That's when I saw it. On the outside of the window pane, right at her eye level, was a handprint. It was huge. I pressed my own hand up against the glass next to it. My hand looked like a child's. This print was easily half again as big. The fingers were long, the palm was broad. It was smeared with mud and grime and rain, but the shape was unmistakable. Something had stood outside that window in the pouring rain and put its hand on the glass while it looked in at my little girl. That was the breaking point. The next day, I went to the home improvement store and spent a small fortune on motion sensor lights. I put them all around the house. I bought security cameras, the best ones I could afford, and mounted them on the corners of the house, pointing at the yard and the tree line. The lights go off all the time. A raccoon, a possum, the wind shaking a branch. But the cameras, they've never caught anything, nothing clear, just shadows, blurs. Sometimes the camera will glitch out for a second when the light triggers, showing just static. It's infuriating. The presence never left. The musky odor still comes on some nights. Sometimes, from deep in the woods, I'll hear these low, guttural grunts. Not like a pig, deeper, like logs rubbing together. My tools go missing from the shed. I'll leave a shovel leaning against the wall, and the next morning it's 20 feet away, just lying in the grass. Small things, but they add up. I've given up trying to prove it or get rid of it. I've just accepted that it's here. This is its place too. I maintain the fences. I keep the lights working. I don't go out after dark unless I absolutely have to. It's a kind of truce. I don't bother it, and it doesn't do whatever it's capable of doing. I have to believe that's the arrangement, but the anxiety is always there. It's a part of our lives now, woven into the fabric of every evening. My kids still wake up sometimes, whispering that they hear the tapping. They're scared. I'm scared. That feeling of safety, of peace in your own home, that's gone. It was taken from us piece by piece over the last 3 years. The quiet of the South Carolina woods isn't quiet anymore. It's just the space between sounds, and I'm always listening, waiting for the next one. Story 19. Okay, so I've never told this to anyone before, not even my family, because honestly, who would believe me? But it's been eating at me for years, and I figure if I'm going to share it anywhere, it might as well be here where people get this kind of stuff. This happened back in mid-July of 1987, and I remember it like it was yesterday. I was deer hunting off Highway 24 near Rhodestown, North Carolina, just outside Jacksonville. It was one of those humid summer days where the air feels thick and heavy, and the mosquitoes are buzzing around like they own the place. I'd been out since late afternoon, perched up in my tree stand, hoping to bag a decent buck before dusk settled in. The woods there are dense, lots of pine and oak, with underbrush so thick you can barely see 10 feet in some spots. I'd hunted this area before. It was quiet, isolated, the kind of place where you don't run into many other people. That day, I was alone, which was normal for me. I liked the solitude, the way the forest sounds wrap around you, making you feel small but part of something bigger. But that day, the solitude started feeling different, heavier, like the woods were holding their breath. I'd been sitting in that stand for a couple of hours, sweating through my shirt, just watching and waiting. The sun was dipping lower, casting long shadows that made everything look twisted and unfamiliar. Around dusk, I spotted a deer, a nice-sized doe, moving through the trees about 50 yards away. But something was off about it. It wasn't grazing calmly like they usually do. It kept stopping, lifting its head, ears twitching like it was hearing things I couldn't. Its body was tense, and it would glance back over its shoulder every few seconds, like it was being followed. I'd seen nervous deer before, maybe spooked by a coyote or something, but this felt different. It was more jittery, almost panicked, and it made the hair on my arms stand up. I figured I might not get another shot, so I lined up my rifle, took a deep breath, and fired. The sound echoed through the trees, sharp and loud, and I saw the deer stumble and go down. I waited there in the stand for what felt like forever, probably about 30 minutes, just to make sure it was done and nothing else was stirring. By then, it was fully dark, the kind of dark where you can't see your hand in front of your face without a light. I climbed down slowly, my boots scraping against the bark, and hit the ground with a soft thud. I had my flashlight in my mouth because I needed both hands to drag the deer. It was heavy, maybe 150 pounds, and the terrain was rough, roots and rocks everywhere, with thick brush grabbing at my legs. I started pulling it toward where I'd parked my truck, about a quarter-mile away. The flashlight beam bounced around, casting crazy shadows that made every stump and branch look like it was moving. I could hear the usual night sounds, crickets, an owl hooting somewhere. But underneath it all, there was this silence, like the woods were too quiet, like they were waiting for something. After maybe 10 minutes of dragging, I had to stop to adjust my gear. My shoulders were aching and the deer's weight was making me stumble. I set the flashlight down on a log so I could use both hands to tighten the strap I had around the deer's antlers. That's when I looked up and my heart just dropped. There, about 20 feet away, were two eyes staring right at me. They were glowing faintly in the flashlight beam, but not like animal eyes reflect. More like they were just there, dark and intense. What got me was how far apart they were. I'm 5'10", and these eyes were level with mine, but the space between them was wider than any bear or deer I'd ever seen. It had to be something big, something standing on two legs, because nothing on four legs has eyes that wide set at that height. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. For a second, I thought it might be another hunter, but who'd be out here in the dark without a light, and why wouldn't they say something? I fumbled for my sidearm, a revolver I always carried for safety, and without thinking, I fired it into the ground near my feet. The bang was deafening and the recoil jarred my arm, but those eyes didn't even blink. They just stayed fixed on me, unblinking, like I hadn't done anything at all. That's when the real fear hit me, cold and sharp in my gut. If it wasn't scared of a gunshot, what the hell was it? Then slowly, it turned its head. Not fast, not aggressive, just a slow, deliberate movement that made my skin crawl. I could hear the rustle of its hair, or whatever it was, and then it took a step back into the thick brush. As it moved, branches snapped loudly, like it was pushing through stuff that should have stopped anything that size. The sound was heavy, crunching, and it faded quickly as it disappeared into the darkness. I stood there, shaking, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. The air around me suddenly smelled strong, a musky, earthy odor, like wet dog and dirt mixed together, but stronger, so thick I could almost taste it. It clung to the back of my throat, making me want to gag. I didn't wait around. I grabbed the flashlight and started dragging the deer again. Faster this time, my hands slippery with sweat. Every few steps, I'd shine the light behind me, half expecting to see those eyes again, but there was nothing. Just the dark and that smell, which seemed to follow me for a bit. As I moved, I noticed broken branches and crushed plants where it had walked. Like something heavy had passed through, that made it real. It wasn't just in my head. Something had been there, something big enough to leave a trail. The rest of the drag to the truck felt like it took hours. Every sound, a twig snapping, leaves rustling, made me jump. I kept my revolver in one hand, ready to fire again if I had to, but my mind was racing. What was that thing? Why didn't it react to the gun? I've been hunting since I was a kid, and I've seen bears, coyotes, even a mountain lion once, but nothing like this. Nothing that stood like a person but moved like an animal. Nothing that smelled that foul or had eyes that wide. When I finally reached my truck, I threw the deer into the bed and leaned against the tailgate, breathing hard. My whole body was trembling, and I had to force myself to calm down enough to field dress the deer. I did it quickly, my hands shaking so bad I nearly cut myself a couple of times. The whole time I kept glancing into the woods, expecting to see movement, but it was just dark and quiet. That musky smell was still in the air, faint but there like a reminder. I got in the truck and drove home, not saying a word to anyone. For days I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. Then about a week later, I went back to the same spot to check if I'd left anything behind. That's when I found the spine of the deer I'd shot, dragged about 300 yards away from where I'd field dressed it. It was clean, like something had picked it apart, but not like coyotes or scavengers would. It was too precise, too focused. That sealed it for me. Whatever I saw that night, it was real, and it had been watching me the whole time. I've never gone back to that area, and I've kept this to myself all these years. Even now, writing this, my hands are a little unsteady. It's one of those things that doesn't fit into the world like it should, and I still can't explain it.